see everybody in person. We'll start with the apologies. So there are no apologies. Just a reminder that this meeting is being broadcast live too, so you know to talk to them.
Is Councillor Byers on the meeting?
Yes,
Coming. Oh, yeah, cool.
Item 2, leave of absence. Conflicts of interest.
Don't you want to come and join me on the Steve office?
I had a conflict of interest on the Community Initiatives Fund for the Chapman's Coast Incorporated. So at this stage, we'll go through, do the others, and then I'll sit back on the table for the next to go to that one. Or any other conflicts of interest?
I have one on the same part of the agenda with the South Catlins Charitable Trust.
Other conflicts of interest? We now go into public
Oh,
forum.
sorry, I'm also on the Wyndham, even though Wyndham, or I do a community board. It's an application to do with the existing model.
So we move on and welcome John Parsons and Karen to speak to us.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa. So I'm actually here as a Rotarian and the administrator of a program that operates in the Southland District and the Southland region, a Rotary project called the EQ-IQ Cyber Safety Program. This program is unique within New Zealand. No one has done a regional project with cyber safety in such large numbers across so many sectors in the community and at no cost to any participant. About 80% of our work is with children, parents, caregivers and teachers. I'm introducing to you John, who is the facilitator of this program, and he is New Zealand's leading authority on cyber safety. John has years of frontline experience and he's developed a toolbox of highly practical, realistic and proven strategies for both children and caregivers, helping them stay safe in the digital world. He also works one-on-one with victims and perpetrators of cybercrime and bullying, and increasingly with our vulnerable older citizens. On this slide, you can actually see some of the outcomes that have been achieved with our school program across Southland. Yeah. John has also written a book about keeping your children safe online, and last year, Rotary gifted 1,000 of those books to Southland schools to use as a resource. We have some great work stories, don't we, John? This feedback here from the school principal, and I think the one that really touched my heart anyway was Mum used to go on her device every few minutes, and then I talked to her after John was last here, and so she borrowed John's book from the library and read it. Now she doesn't go on her device all the time. And then a girl in that same class told how she made a special box and asked her family to put their devices in it when they ate dinner, and they actually did. John is funded by the Trust for 85 days a year and is available outside those times for assistance to anybody within the Southland region boundaries that we are funded to operate in. He was very busy during the COVID-19 lockdown with calls from this region, and he's going to share some of those with you today. We also have some resources that we share with anybody that would like them, and I can give these to you electronically or as a print. So it's now over to John.
Thank you. As we were going into we were in level 3 at the time when I was working in the region and working in the schools, you could feel the tension building, the uncertainty of what was coming. And that was fed and fueled by access to what we were seeing in the media overseas. And of course, the problem for young people is that when they access that information from overseas, it affects them locally. But they're not actually seeing the circumstances of their local region, they're seeing an issue that's somewhere else. So that was a major issue both for the students and for the teachers. And I remember I was, 2 days before we went to level 4, I was walking out of the school and a student came out to me in tears and was sort of wanting to talk to me. And she said, look, I don't really know where to start, but she said, I'm so worried for my mother and father. They're 50 plus and I'm really worried that something can happen to them. And of course, that was a result of the media from overseas, but a very real thing for that young person. So we sat down and talked about the issue and what she could do to reduce that anxiety. And then, of course, we went into level 4. A lot of what I'm going to talk about here is risk assumption, but it's based on logic and experience and what we've seen. When a society is so distracted en masse to deal with such a big event like that, what that means to the criminal is it creates an opportunity. So all sectors of society will be targeted. Education, health, civil service, government, private sector, children, older people. All of the issues that they would face in their daily execution of their services in a normal society, then the issues that they would face potentially can increase. So when you've got a society that's in a normal functioning mode, if you like, where there are no general issues to deal with, the older people and the younger people, they are always the most vulnerable anyway. And then, of course, when you go into this lockdown, into this pandemic, those groups become even more isolated and more vulnerable. So a senior citizen is what a criminal will call asset-rich and isolated. That's in a normal society which is not locked down. Asset-rich and isolated. What a criminal means by that is they've climbed over their mortgage, so they may not have access to finances immediately, but they've got a major asset like a home. They can be typically isolated because family have moved on and they're generally on their own. But now you put them into an environment where they're locked down, they are truly isolated, particularly if they haven't got used to using technology. For young children, here's an example. If you think about every 12 months in this country, on average, 9 to 10 children lose their lives through some form of violence committed against them. When the child comes to school, there is an opportunity for teachers and trained people to see behaviours and symptoms that they could report on through a process to Orangutanariki or to the police, etc. But now those children weren't in the school, they were back in the home environment in these lockdown situations. So the vulnerability of those children then increases again because we don't have the eyes of the community on them in that moment. But these are major issues that we've experienced in this lockdown. And of course, we now will face potentially some of the issues of that going forward. During the lockdown, the calls that I started to get immediately within the first 2 weeks were from senior citizens because they genuinely felt that the world was ending. Many of them wanted to sell their homes, sell their assets, turn that into gold, and then bury the gold somewhere. And of course, if you look at that out of context, the way I'm describing it, that sounds absurd. But if you've got an older person that is not connected to the community, that is now in a lockdown situation, that reads this media, that sees this coming through, on top of that, they've got the global news accounts of what's going wrong, then it's a short trip for them logically then to start thinking about they need to do something to avoid this catastrophe. And of course, we would work with them on the phone. I'd say, look, have you got anybody else in your home that I can talk to on your behalf? And it could be an older daughter or a son. And I'd say, look, we need to make sure that your mother or father is supported and looked after through this period. Be very careful of how they're using technology and who they're talking to. And that was a very common one in the first 14 days, this reaction to, and it was really a reaction to what was happening. Because people tend to think if I don't respond in some way, then I'm going to be even more vulnerable. So I've got to do something. So the emails that were coming through to senior citizens were designed to trick them, to deceive them, to steal their money. Now, that's nothing new, of course. That's nothing new. But if you've got senior citizens en masse in lockdown, we can't talk to them, you can't see them, and they're not generally involved with their clubs like Age Concern and senior citizens. So I believe, and I've got no evidence of this yet, but I do believe there will be a lot of senior citizens who have lost a lot of money through some kind of scam, and I believe that that will have increased in this lockdown. I have worked with individuals in this region that have lost significant amounts of money, you know, $400,000, $80,000, $60,000. We had one person that was on the verge of sending over $100,000. We got the call on it. We were able to sit with this person and work with them compassionately through the situation. We avoided them from sending that money. They are now on the other side of the situation, and they understand that what they were going through was a deception. The most important thing I can tell you about these individuals is that they are the victims of crime in the truest sense. What we have to do as a society, though, is understand that, not verbally, but really psychologically. If a person walks down the street and they're mugged, we surround them with compassion and support. If someone gets robbed in a cybercrime, many people think that person is stupid. And that's not how we should treat victims. They need compassion, support, and therapeutic support to get through that and beyond that situation. Often those victims are also at the potential of what we call a reload. So 6 months down the track, if somebody has sent $60,000 to somebody for a Bitcoin investment, what happens 6 months down the track? The same criminals will recontact that person and say that I'm a judge in this country. I've heard about the fact that you've lost your money. If you send me $10,000, we'll help you get your $60,000 back. That's called a reload. So when you work with these people, it isn't a one-off. You've got to spend time with them and help them understand that what can potentially happen in the future. My concern for young people going forward is if you think about children that have been in this lockdown for this amount of time, what impact has that had on them, and what will that look like when they do start coming back into the school environments? In the last couple of weeks, I've been speaking to young children in this region as well, and certainly this week. And of course, what they will often say is it was a fantastic time. You know? Why did you enjoy it? Well, you could eat pizzas whenever you wanted. You could get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and just sit there and do nothing. And the other thing which was interesting, and I'm glad I never did this, I was about to publish a book, it wouldn't have sold one copy. And it was actually about the damaging effect of too much screen time. And not just on the body and the eyes, but on how it erodes our relationships with each other. But of course, when we went into lockdown, screen time was fantastic because we wanted the children to be on their screens because they're under pressure. But also, can you imagine you've got 4 teenagers in the house and you're going to say, look, you can't use your device for 4 weeks. So screen time was good. Of course, now what's happened is we've asked children within 48 hours to forget the fact that you don't have to do anything at all, and you've got to get back into a goal-orientated environment where you're going to be assessed every day by other people at school. So get out of bed at 7 o'clock in the morning and go to school. That created so much tension that neighbours were calling other neighbours because they could hear arguments next door from families, where teenagers would say, hang on a minute, I don't want to go back to school. I don't want to pick up the computer again in the fashion that you want me to. So these are all things that started to occur as we reopened. The students are telling me today, as we talk to them, that they had worries, and their worries generally are for the older members of their family because they understand how this virus affects older people. But a lot of the impact on them has been from the news media beyond our own borders, in the same way for senior citizens. So one of the tasks we have is to really refocus our community back to local news, to local media, to local support services. And what I would say to the council is this, that going forward, we do have to be prepared for an increase, and I'm not a psychologist or a doctor in any fashion, but as a risk assumption and talking to my colleagues, we do have to be prepared for an increase in children presenting with anxieties and all sorts of issues which they've carried because of this event that we've just had. We do believe that's going to come. So what we need to be thinking about is absolutely funding adequately the mental health services that support our communities. And without hesitation, the schools are going to need a lot of support. The counselling services, the guidance counsellors, they're going to be needed to help these teenagers and young people as they start to present, I believe, with the effect of this pandemic that we've just had. Those are things that we're going to be seeing going forward. I also believe that we'll start to see senior citizens coming forward, talking about the fact that they've lost money in various ways. That's not new, but I do believe the numbers will have increased because of the circumstances we're in. The project that I work with, and I feel so proud that I can be involved in this, does address some of those issues, but speaking from my own experience in all communities around New Zealand, mental health services and services that provide therapeutic support for people, whether it's a senior citizen or a young person, that has to be on our priority, that they're funded properly and adequately resourced. I'm probably on my time, so I don't want to go further. I get paid to speak and I've got to stop now. I appreciate this opportunity. Finally, I will say this to you. There is something about the Southlander, and I truly mean this. They are resilient, they are robust, there is no social veneer, they tell you how it is. And all of the children I've spoke to so far have not hesitated to want to come back to school to meet their friends and get on with what's in front of them. And that is truly something I do believe is unique to the Southlander. Thank you all very much.
John? Seems pretty simple if we walk down there. Are there any questions?
Whilst what you've just told us is very good, as far as the schools are concerned, will they get some sort of address like you have just given us? Will they have access to that sort of thing?
I address the schools regularly on this issue. I provide professional learning development for the teachers around what to do in certain circumstances, and we work with the students as well. So that happens on a regular basis.
So you'll have a pretty big job from here on.
Absolutely, and I am supported by the project. You know, there are people that are around me to support me. And we also need to understand, you know, we've got absolutely dedicated teachers in this region that do an incredible job on behalf of families and students. They don't just teach, they absolutely save lives, in my opinion. So there is, you know, beyond me, there are lots of people out there doing incredible jobs.
John's on Stewart Island next Tuesday, Bruce.
Okay, good.
Can't wait to get on the plane.
Yeah, thanks, John.
Thank you very much.
Just to clarify, was there a link between the screen time and the mental health?
In my opinion, there is. What I can tell you is that if you look at the evidence that's coming forward, let me just explain it like this so we don't get too bogged down in the minutiae of this, you know. What I can tell you is if an adult is plugged into their device for excessive amounts of time and they're raising a young child, the child goes through developmental needs. If that child's needs are not met with eye contact, hugs and love and attention, then the child will pay some kind of price going forward in the future. So we often think of a young person's use of technology as being the issue. Now we're saying that adults have got to start putting the technology down and paying more attention to their own children. Families that eat together heal together. They did research that said that if children can spend more time sitting at the dining room table with mom and dad, making eye contact, those children fare far better with dealing with anxiety and pressure and antisocial behaviour. So I believe there is strong evidence to say that too much screen time does affect a child.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just what sort of support or interactions have you had with the health providers such as the Ministry of Health, DHB, re mental health issues, as to where's the link with those health professionals?
In as much as how we get the children to see those people?
Exactly. That's where your funding stream comes from as well.
Okay, the issue that I have there is if let's say we've got a child that's in Southampton, 14-year-old girl that's in Southampton, and then when we become aware of that, we put a report in, and it's looked at. That child may not meet the threshold to be seen immediately by somebody in the mental health sector. That's a major issue, in my opinion, across the country. So that's an issue of funding and resourcing that isn't available.
So a threshold.
There's a threshold there, and that can be debated about what that threshold is. But what I can tell you from my experience to answer that question is that we do end up working with teenagers and trying to get them into mental health services that are simply not there because of lack of resource and lack of funding. That's a major, major issue that I face in my work, but so do the teachers and the GPs that are seeing these young people. Too many counsellors, too many guidance counsellors are juggling these young people in the school corridors, trying to support them and help them when they need absolutely dedicated professional help from the mental health sector. And I think that, I do believe that that needs to be looked at going forward, and hopefully there will be funding that will be released to address some of those issues.
John has got in front of doctors, psychologists and people like that through Southland Hospital. We provide professional development for them around screen time and stuff like that.
If I may, Madam Chair. Just picking on what you're saying, it's very good. I still come back to the issue is that it's a national issue, it's not a local issue. And therefore, the Ministry of Health, they need to hear this, they need to be involved in this. Absolutely. DHB and all these sort of organisations, because that's where your professionals are, that's where your funding stream is. And they're the ones that have to make the decisions that lower that threshold and get resources. So I'm not quite sure how where that link is with what you're doing.
Well, just coming back to one thing as well, if I could pick up on a comment you made, that the professionals are there, they're not always there. Because this region, I believe, needs more psychologists.
Yeah, exactly.
So they're not always there. You know, that's really important to remember. And I don't really want to get hung up too much on the threshold of somebody with a self-harming issue. But generally speaking, those are the issues. And to perhaps I misunderstood the question, we do provide PLD for the health sector. We work with psychologists and doctors at the local level in what to do when they've got a particular situation that involves a child around the use of technology. But I do accept that there is a national issue. But I do also believe that there are some locations in the country where it is difficult for people that maybe that might not want to get to that environment for some particular reason and get that right person in the location, particularly around clinical psychologists and things like that. Anybody else?
Yes, John, just follow up on Councillor Abel's question there. It is, I believe, a national issue. And do you actually get a great deal of time on national television? But I'm sure your speech that you give us today would be a dash like more use on national television than some of that garbage we get on it now.
Yeah, I do talk nationally on TV. I talk through the media and through radio. This isn't, and let me just repeat this, I'm not saying this is unique to Southland. I'm simply saying it's a national issue, but I experience it because I'm embedded in this region. So if I fly into another part of the country and work for one day, and I say that this is a child, this is what's going on, I don't see often the failure behind the scenes of the process that's not available. But when I can work in a region like this continually and make connections to others, you see the child at the beginning and you see the progress going forward over time. But it is a national issue, I accept that.
Some of your comments you made earlier on about the elder people, some of them get very frustrated, a lot of them because they can't use these things. And as you said, they are very easily led with some of these people that come across with scams.
Yeah.
And yes, I think, it's a bit more time on television all over so the older people can actually watch you and listen.
Well, that's what we do for the project. Can I add something to this? Let's not get tied up in scams around emails. Give an example. A senior citizen that's been married for 40 years, his partner passes away, 6 months down the track, he seeks the company of others. He goes into a companion website and believes he's found someone he can trust. He starts talking to them about financial loss, so he's expressing vulnerability. He has 1 or 2 bottles of wine and sends a personal image of himself to this person. The next day starts to get blackmailed by a gang in another country, because that's what we call sextortion. And they threaten that they're going to send a picture back to his community. That can happen to a person that's 65 or 14 years of age, right? So it isn't just the email that comes through. We are social beings. What we should be doing for senior citizens is absolutely empowering them to use technology because it's a form of communication. Why should anybody that gets older lose the ability to communicate? Helping them use this technology is important. That's why Age Concern and CNET and people like that do such a wonderful job. But if you can get me a time on TV, I'll be there, I promise you.
Challenge for you, Louise.
Probably more so a comment than a question, but just to support that screen time issue, and particularly with young people, I remember taking a group of kids tramping and there was no cell coverage. 4 hours into the tramp, all of a sudden they realised they were actually talking to each other and not to their phones.
Yeah.
And the conversation was deep, it was meaningful, it was real. And so I think there's actually a value in having blackout zones that rural broadband's trying to cover everything, but there's actually real value in having those spots, and I think we need to protect them. You look at places like Borland, you can't get cell coverage there unless you stand on a rock doing this on a particular. But there's a real value in disconnecting from the connection.
And if I could add to that, I've been into regions in this region where there hasn't been a cell tower. And you see these children trying to download Facebook and it takes 3 hours just to get it down. And all of a sudden the cell tower goes in. And these children then are not playing in the paddock or the field, but they're staying in on a Saturday to be on a device. And you see the children say, some of them are saying, I wish we hadn't put the cell tower in, but I can't get off the device. That's because of the dopamine. Do you know that the biggest thing that children need, and we all know this, if they're raised with love, with compassion, if we sit with them, if we eat food with them on a regular basis, that inoculates them against some of the stresses we face in life. But if we raise them to become sedentary, to sit on their devices and not make eye contact with us, but further still, if we don't make eye contact with them, it's our grandchildren that are going to lose out because our children are going to parent them. So I think rather than focusing on the technology, focusing on the relationships we have with each other. And the last thing I say to children at the end of every workshop is this: you are unique, you are valuable, and you are loved. And that's what we all need. So thank you very much.
Well said. Very good, thank you.
Moving on to the confirmation of minutes. The minutes are on page 8. So the minutes from the 6th of May. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried.
Page 19, Madam Chair. Rhode Island Review Future Opportunities.
Karen Holland, taking out the community partnership.
Thank you. Kia ora, Tina Koto Katoa, Chair Case, Mayor Tong and councillors. So I'll take this report on the Stewart Island Rakiura Future Opportunities project as read. As you're aware, this project started in November last year with funding from the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, MB, with co-funding from Council. The Future Rakiura Group was formed from some of the graduates of the leadership program, along with some of the community champions. A 6-month program of work was developed to move the group towards having a robust structure, good community engagement, and ultimately a future opportunities plan. Future Rakiura held an official launch on Waitangi Day with a hanging. Very good feedback was received from the wider community and also achieved their goal of bringing the community together to connect and build stronger relationships. It's pleasing to note that the group has received funding from Sanford Salmon Grant Fund to hold this community hanging next year. The original Future Rakiura strategic plan had 5 goals, and that has since been modified to 3. 3 work streams have been formed, being development, community and governance. A community meeting to promote better communication and connectedness on the island was planned for March 26, and this was an opportunity to update the community on progress and plans, and other key stakeholders have also been invited to do the same. Those stakeholders were the Stewart Island Community Board, the Rakiura Māori Lands Trust, Rakiura Marine Guardians, Great South and Ngaitahu Fisheries. As we know, COVID-19 happened and the meeting was unable to proceed. So while Future Rakiura has made very good progress since it was formed in November, it would still have been forming and developing when the agreement with MB was due to finish at the end of this month. This was a real risk, leaving them vulnerable and perhaps even failing. Lack of support and resources have been a contributing factor on 2 past occasions with strategic type work on the island. It was therefore agreed with MB that the timeframe for delivery of this project be extended to the end of August or possibly September, because at that stage we didn't know when lockdown was going to finish. MB also accepted our recommendation that the final plan may look different to what was originally agreed as our outcomes with them, due in part to COVID-19. Our consultant fund, James, continued to work with the co-leaders and the group during lockdown by Zoom, obviously, and during this time a roadmap for the future was developed. This roadmap sets out the strategic priorities and an action plan for future Rakiura. The group has already progressed under the Restart Rakiura workstream, the community survey. Future Rakiura are extremely pleased with the community response to date to that survey, and they've actually received over 100 replies. The community meeting is being rescheduled for late July to present the survey results and to start a community conversation to determine priority areas for action. It's hoped that the other stakeholders will also be able to attend that meeting. In addition, they have started the process to become a legal entity. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. So good that things have been progressing here. It's slower than maybe they wanted to, but it's, which is a good result. Any questions?
Just endorse Karen's words there. They're changing a bit, keep going, do things. Great leadership coming through. So, the younger folks that we really want to be business to. No, so we're very pleased with that.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. Excellent work, fantastic. Question I have is, how does this fit in with the local community board's own strategic direction? How do those 2 aspects really tie together? Because I would have thought that when I've read, some of that would also fit in with the local community board as well as part of their vision, strategic direction for the community itself. So how does that feed in?
Yeah, so it does. They actually link really well, both the plans. And Future Rakiura and the community board meet on a regular basis through the Future Rakiura attending the board meetings and giving them an update. As part of the restart plan and the survey, it is hoped that not just the community board or Future Rakiura, that a leadership group may emerge of, say, 8 to 10 that will take the governance role of the across the island, but be representative of all of the groups on the island. And those talks have started already.
I'm just curious about the original project scope was for an application for 835,000,
Yes,
and then it came down to 100,000.
Yeah.
What was lost from that scope, and is that an indication of further stuff that's going to need to be done?
Rex, you might like to.
So through Madam Chair, basically 3 years was lost. So it was over a 4-year program of work, and really the irony is the nub of the issue that is now facing the island is the fact of the continuation of the program into year 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
And that was identified with MB, alongside MB, actually in these chambers, when that project proposal was put forward. But when it comes to the decision makers in Wellington, they cut it to a 1 year, get it up, and then basically resource it from a regional or local perspective yourselves. So it was the Rolls Royce version, but it was also from a number of years' experience, having seen these things in other parts of the district, region, and country, that we know, or we've from experience see that it's year 2, 3, and 4. We were like a small medium business, small medium enterprise business. It's years 2, 3, and 4 that are the crunch years. So that was the part that was, I suppose, cut out of that 800, and made it a bit skinnier in some other areas as well. So that's created a lot more probably of Karen's time facilitating that, which is absorbed through council's contribution by way of the resource provided through the community partnership leader functions and the liaison officer functions, etc. But that's probably it. The extent was just to squeeze into 1 year and if the dollars came back.
And if I could add that, that is the biggest challenge, because you would have seen in the restart plan that they'd like to employ a restart activator person on the island. And to get funding for that in the current environment post-COVID is actually much more difficult than when we started thinking about that. However, there is still some funding options and we're continuing to help them navigate those. So we are hopeful that they will get funding for a person to be based on the island to take whatever the plan is at the end of August forward.
Just one of the questions, Madam Chair. Just pick up on 2 points. One is, I've certainly, Karen talked about the meeting in July, the group and reconvening. I mean, it might be a big ask, but I certainly would encourage any of you as district councillors who were interested, not just leave it to Councillor Ford as the resident councillor, but it's actually a good example in a community of what other communities can be. So if you could get to it as councillors, I would encourage you to.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I'll just add to Councillor Kramer's question around alignment with community board or community board alignment with community is the work that is going to require the energy and the oomph for both at a community level and at a council level. So it's not just with Stewart Island, Rakiura. It's again across our district as we meander through the amalgamation, for want of a better word, of what is community or what is council community, that representative leadership approach, and what is community led, and getting that to mesh and mix is where the challenges lie. I mean, what our community leadership team members have talked to me about over the last 12 months is their learnings from other districts where there isn't the representative leadership model at the local level means by default the community lead. And so that's the situation we're in. So just going back to Councillor Kramer's point, and I purposefully talked about aligning to community board or community board aligning to community, and I think there's a happy medium through that. And one of the things that I've certainly been observing from an arm's length with this particular project, which Karen is there really well, is that there's no one agency that has taken ownership of it, and that there's multiple agencies continuously feeding into it, and they're different agencies at different times.
I know.
So I think that's again something from across our district perspective, is these sorts of discussions open up that we can all take heed of. And I said I'd have 2 things, but I'll just do the third one. The other thing that's really important that's come out of this is how agile this group was, changing from their 3 areas of focus, and then COVID hit, and then they're straight into what they've now got as their pathway, which, while not significantly different, is a change from that page 24 of the hub. The strategic priorities of governance, restart Rakiura, and relationship partnerships have now become their focus because of COVID.
That's right.
So.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think for me it is, following on from Councillor Kramer, it's perhaps worthy of reflection at a later point about these 2, I guess, the community board and future Rakiura. What is it telling us about how we might strengthen or alter that community board approach, because these are the people that we wanted to be leading our communities as well. So not right now, but later on, I think it'd be worthwhile getting that kind of feedback.
We have got a representational review coming up with you.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Karen. The recommendation is on page 20. From thank you, Councillor Ford, seconded. Councillor Fraser, all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Is on page 25 is my report. Quiet time. Any questions? Otherwise, I can move on to my report. Nothing much to say about it. Grammar, all those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Welcome, Liz.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, this report is about discussing the final grants from the Community Initiative Fund. As you're aware, it is now, after this round, it now goes to the Community Partnership Fund and it is divided among community boards. We normally would have this discussion in early May, late April, but we extended the period for grants into May because of COVID. So we received a good number of grants, and we have $80,966 to give away, and have grants totaling $74,122 for 23 and 24, along with the discussion about number 23. So if there aren't any questions, I suggest we go through page by page. If you have any questions before that, I will try and answer them. Cool. All right, if we start from 1 to 5. If there are any questions about the 5 on that first page.
All right, it's probably a bit more of a general one, but a lot of them, the amounts that some of them have been recommended to grant whatever they applied for, but some of them haven't. Is there any sort of general rules, or how did you come up with?
We look at each application case by case, how much money they've got in their bank account, where they've applied to other organisations and things like that.
Okay.
Any questions or queries about these 1 to 5?
Take those 5. We'll move on to the next 6 to 10.
Taking out 8. It's a conflict of interest, but no, so I'll do it last.
Do that one, Vicky.
Do that last, yep. So 6, 7, 9 and 10.
Support
Support it. Excellent.
it. Just a question, if you don't mind. The Stewart Island project at 11,400, and it mentions the shelter and playground items. I presume the 11,400 is just the barbecue. Yeah.
The next, 5, 11 to 15.
Just one question around question 11, the Southern Reap. Who are the vulnerable drivers in Te Anau? Are they the elderly or the young, or?
It's both. They have expressed youth getting into employment, getting a driver's licence helps them to gain employment. And just really anybody without a driver's licence, just assisting them in general.
Okay, it's probably a program which I've talked about in other communities. So, okay.
They do deliver that in other communities.
I do. Really interesting.
So then, take that page off there. Yep.
Yes.
The next page, 16 to 19. Great. And if we do 20, 21, 22 and 24, and then come back to talk about 23. So everyone's...
So number
22 out about the conflict of interest.
So number 24 4 on their noise, is that, would they apply, would that have come into the creative communities on it? Would they apply them?
Yeah, so they have applied to Creative IoT, IT Foundation and ICC as well.
So do you look at the content of those as well? That's about $11,000 a workshop. It's a significant amount of money, isn't it? And the vision of, I guess this is provided once a year as opposed to.
Yeah, so they do have all the details listed in the application. The workshops and workshops. Any other questions on those? Alright.
23.
If we do 23 and then, Karen.
Do 23
We'll do 23 first.
So, the discussion.
So we put recommendation to discuss because it is a retrospective application that's already been purchased and installed. And I believe Mr. Capel may have some background if you have any questions.
It has been discussed through the ward councils, I think, is that right? And because the system for ward funding hadn't, or still isn't confirmed, we're working with the mayor to get that to the next stage. That opportunity was sort of, I suppose, parked would be probably the best way to put it. And then obviously there's an opportunity for them, even though it's retrospective, it's identified that it's retrospective and the opportunity comes through here like any other organisation.
I'm quite happy to support this. I think this organisation has been waiting for a considerable amount of time for an answer. And I know Councillor Fraser has been right on it, and it has, bureaucracy has sort of let it down, so I'm happy to support the recommendation.
I'm just wondering, what was the point or what was the reason for a temporary boiler, and how temporary is it, and what's the long-term solution?
I could answer that. Had a bit of discussion with them. Essentially, they had spent quite a bit on maintenance on other areas of the pool, and then the boiler blew. And so there was a very short-term, when I say very short-term, a 2 to 3 year kind of option of putting a second-hand boiler in that they've kind of put in while they go through a process of working out the best solution, and obviously a far bigger expense. So they're looking at a longer term view of the pool and maintenance. They've got some really good plans in place to do that. It was just they'd spent this huge amount of money on maintaining a whole lot of other areas of the pool, and then week 1 of the season, boom. So yeah, so there's certainly it's a 2 to 3 year kind of look while they sort out the really long term. Had they not done it, the pool would have been closed and hundreds of kids would have had no swimming.
I mean, also support it as well. Also noting that it looks like they probably have bought themselves some time by the looks of this to get a temporary boiler until they work out make a plan for the pool. If it hadn't been done, by the sound of it, it would mean that the pool would have been closed for that season. So very happy to support the recommendations.
I was speaking to the Central Southland Sports Coordinator yesterday at the college, and she was talking about the numbers going through the pool. So I just thought I'd give you some figures because it's a very well-used community pool with a very proactive committee. The CUC currently pays $10,000 towards the pool at the moment. The Year 9 and 10s go through a swim safe program, and all the contributing schools apart from Lime Hills support the CUC pool. REAP does a swim safe program, and there's approximately 200 children in swimming lessons in the pool. So, you know, I support it wholly. I just thought I'd give you a bit of background.
Yeah, I'd like to move that we grant them the full amount requested.
I'll second that.
Within budget.
Which is it? It's a mess.
She did too. No decided.
You check the spelling though.
Yeah, I did. Not all the time, it doesn't work.
Okay, so the next two items, there's the item 8 is the Catlins Coast Incorporated. You'll see there that there's been some weather damage and vandalism. Amount requested 850, recommended 850. Any discussion on that matter? Support that one.
Yeah.
And the next one on page 31 is the, no, it's not.
Just the one.
Oh, it's just the one. I thought it was the South Catlins Charitable Trust one.
Okay, so that was just, that's just.
Oh, sorry. My apologies.
So now we'll go to the recommendations, having made those adjustments for 8
So your recommendation is on the board is the same as what's up there, except 23. It's taking out committee to discuss asking for it and leaving 6796.
Happy to move the recommendations with the amendment, Madam Chair.
The second there.
Moving right along and staying with we have on page 37, the Support New Zealand Rural Food Fund application.
Again, with, thank you, Madam Chair. Again, with this report, we lengthened the application period because of COVID, so it closed on May the 15th as well. We received good grants considering there was no sport being played, so they were planning ahead. And we also received notification from Sport NZ that we were allowed to carry money forward because of COVID. So we have still some money left over, and so we can carry some of that forward as well. So happy to discuss any or Councillor Runcorn.
Well, thank you very much for considering this application. I had a conversation with Andrea Biggs, the sports coordinator at Central Southern College last week, asking about the Rural Travel Fund when it closed, and I said it has, but decided to go ahead and potentially put a late application in because her concerns around the kids playing sport, the parents being able to afford the subs, and what's looking forward for them is that sport's going to be played later, it's going to come into carving, they're going to have to hire vans. So I have a letter and an application from Andrea in Central Southern College to the members of the Southern District Council. Thank you for considering this late application for the Sports New Zealand Travel Fund. Due to COVID-19 restrictions and the uncertainty around whether or not winter sports would commence again this year, CSC has only just started setting fees for sports teams this week. We'd appreciate any financial assistance to help our families at this challenging time. We need to hire vans for travel of the 3 sports mentioned in the application. This is due to the time of day they are travelling and parents being unable to help at these times. Thank you for your consideration. I look forward to your response. She's applied for 1,800 kilometres to transport football, rugby teams for local midweek competitions. I have gone through Judy, thank you, yesterday, and Alison has a copy of that application as well. And she does understand it's late, and I know you can't see the president, but because it's such a challenging time for the communities, hoping we could consider it.
So the calculation on the rules, discussion on that? Is everyone happy to accept that application?
I'm happy to support the application. I'm just wondering about other schools that might be in a similar position. How would those be considered? You've said you've got funds that are carried forward. Are you setting another date or for those?
Yeah, there's another round at the end of September, so I was going to add the total to that amount then.
So they could make a retrospective application at that time.
We have allowed retrospective applications in the past, so yes.
Further discussion on that? So we have
So I have a new recommendation, Madam Chair, that the committee accept the late application from Central Southland College and approve the allocated amount of $800.
So that one in the do I hear someone willing to move the recommendations? Thank you, Councillor Fraser. Seconded Councillor Owen. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much, Louise. Page 43.
Right, so this report is just to provide you with a little bit of information about the Sport NZ Community Resilience Fund. So set up in response to COVID, Sport NZ has given funds out to regional sports trusts to distribute to their local sports clubs or regional sports clubs, regional organisations, to assist them through the process when they have financial difficulty in this immediate COVID April to June time. So local clubs could apply for up to $1,000 to help with operational costs, and regional organisations up to $40,000. So if I can just take that as read, but what I can update you in the figures. So yesterday I talked to Sport Southland and they have now received 78, they've approved 78 applications, and they had another 3 that they just had to look over. 17 of those were regional, 61 were local. They've given out $201,000 and 714, which is about 61% of the total that they've got to give out. So I would imagine they'll still have a few people come in.
Good. How were the sports clubs notified that this fund was available?
So there was quite extensive press releases sent out. There was in the media, it was up on the Sports Southland website pretty much immediately. They had about a week to get it all together, and they've just had dedicated staff working on it the whole time.
I've sent it out to the database as well.
Yeah.
It's really, Kevin, it's still available, isn't it? So I mean, as councillors, you can go out, it's still available, and you can go out and canvass your communities and the sports clubs within those communities if they have received
Is there an application form?
Yes, there is a process, and it's all on their website. On Sport Southland's website. They have on their homepage, they have a big banner that you just click on and it takes you straight there. They also have staff that are solely working on this. So if you've got issues, you just ring them or email them and they'll talk people through the application.
Okay, thank you.
I just wonder if we get an updated list of those.
Yep, certainly. Yeah.
It's quite remarkable the clubs that are on there, it's hardship. There's a few out there, isn't there? So,
Stocked up and then they.
No further questions. Will someone read the recommendation on page 43? Councillor Fraser, all those in favour? Aye. Against? you. One. The table is showing this quite leave it to share with people and thank you very much, Madam Chair, your worship, councillors. So the purpose of this report is to present 3 COVID-19 specific projects that were undertaken during the lockdown period by staff. There's 3 presented today. There's the lessons learned from previous crises, a review of the significant forecasting assumptions, and a district wellbeing scan. So while the impacts of COVID-19 are still largely unknown, there are social, cultural and economic disruptions in the short, medium and long term, obviously every year. In May, this committee endorsed these projects and requested that staff maintain a watch and brief. So following the presentations, there are 2 options presented in this report. The first option is to continue with that watch and brief. The second option is to request that staff might undertake further detailed work with any or all of the projects presented. So I'm really going to hand over to each of the authors of these presentations. There's some very detailed work being undertaken here, and at your discretion, Madam Chair, to have questions following each of the presentations. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'll pass over to Mrs. Edwards for the presentation.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, councillors. So the purpose of my report was to critically review literature on past crises so we could start to identify some of the trends that can be used to prepare for the COVID-19 recovery. So my report has examined the response and recovery efforts from health crises, economic crises and what have been termed as meteor events. So the particular events themselves have been chosen for their relevance on a global scale and on a national scale. So what's been evident in this piece of work is that the COVID-19 outbreak is a standalone event. We're facing a self-inflicted economic crisis as a necessary response to a health crisis. The scale, the depth and the breadth of this pandemic may have repercussions and implications that we cannot yet predict. So in analysing these past crises, it's been very easy to find the differences and less easy to find the commonalities between them. However, there are common themes, and these will give us some direction in terms of avoiding past mistakes and replicating what has worked well in the past. So as we've seen with the Canterbury quakes, events like these, they don't come with set of instructions and they don't necessarily follow a linear path to recovery. So it's important that council understands there's no rules to follow in these instances, and that ultimately council is going to need to learn to prepare to be unprepared. Successful recovery events in the past have shown the need for agility, flexibility, and also the ability to adapt in a dynamic situation. So any forward planning on council's behalf is going to need an agile approach going forward in order that it can be responsive to the changing needs in our community. Secondly, council also needs to understand that the recovery process going forwards is likely to be long and potentially painful. So in order to be successful, it's going to be vital that we keep the community on board with us. We're living in a time full of misinformation and disinformation, and events such as the Spanish flu have shown us where lack of trust or respect in authorities has led to some very poor recovery outcomes. This is going to be a time where council's effective, honest and open communication is going to be central, so the community knows what decisions are being made on their behalf and also understands the reasons why. Lastly, council is going to need to look broadly at social recovery. It's going to need to include social, economic and financial considerations, as well as keeping the community at the heart of its single focus. So in order to achieve this, council is going to need to continue to collaborate, continue building on the strengths of others, and to utilise those skills and knowledge that we have at a regional, district and national level. So my report has shown where uncoordinated, uninformed and panic short-term decision making has led to poor recovery outcomes. Instead, by engaging in effective communication, by being open to collaboration, by being dynamic in our strategic thinking, the council does have the opportunity now to support what is an informed and resilient community going through this recovery phase. I hope that answers any questions you might have on that.
Question of effective communication. So, they will let us know that we will reach questions.
All right, it's not really a question. Just about, as we come out of the COVID-19 experience, I suppose, and we've seen the harm that it's caused in so many ways. Well, we've seen some of it, we probably haven't realised the extent. But there is that other side of it that a lot of people sort of realise that some of what we were doing before was pretty unsustainable. And we talk about the GDP, but there's an element of that GDP that was sheer rampant consumerism and not doing the planet or anybody any good. So I hope that we don't sort of just headlong tear off trying to be back where we were before, that we want to learn something out of it that sustains the future. I don't know where you start with those learnings, whether it's an individual home or at council tables or at government, but we need to remember, we need to have that awareness.
I enjoyed that report, Jane.
Thank you.
Okay. I wonder if this is a good time for the council to concentrate on the core services, the reason that it exists. You mentioned playing a role economically, but of course, to play an economic role, to funds, they come from our community. So the feedback I get from our community is that they would rather make the decisions about how they come out of COVID themselves. They're the people that run the businesses. They perhaps would rather have the money, retain the funds themselves rather than have the council spending for them. So I still think that perhaps a really intense focus on core services done well, figuring out how to embed the well-being, the four well-beings into the core services might be a worthwhile focus for this council. And it might be some good ideas that would attract some funding from the current government.
Through you, Madam Chair, I believe the reports that are coming up next will have some way to addressing where this focus and recovery will be.
Good analysis.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I invite Mr. Donegan up to the table to look at the review of the significant forecasting assumptions. It's objection B on 26.
Good afternoon, everyone. During 2019, the process of developing the significant forecasting assumptions began. This was a comprehensive process that involved activity managers, the executive leadership team, and councillors. The draft assumptions were endorsed by council at a February meeting earlier this year. As part of those resolutions, it was noted that any new information that may impact the significant forecasting assumptions will be updated and presented back prior to the adoption of the long-term plan for 2031. As a result of this resolution, this report focuses on the 15 significant forecasting assumptions endorsed by council and how those assumptions may or may not have changed due to the potential impacts of COVID-19. The analysis of those assumptions was based on available literature and information at the time of writing. Since then, consideration has already started on the impact of COVID-19 and short-term response as part of the recovery and restart phases. Council and ELT are assessing these impacts, discussing measures such as the austerity option, discussed at the previous council meeting, on how best to navigate the next 3-year period in particular. However, it's important to recognise that the significant forecasting assumptions work is developed as part of the long-term plan process, and how these assumptions may impact the district over the next 10 years. Assumptions are developed to be used as a strategic tool and show that council's LTP does actually have a long-term focus. The overall theme of the analysis is, at this time, the majority of the assumptions developed largely remain unchanged, particularly when fully viewed over a 10-year long-term plan program. However, there are a few assumptions that will or may be impacted, particularly in the short term, and it's these assumptions that should be focused on. The assumption most likely to be significantly impacted is tourism. Tourism businesses and attractions are bracing for huge impacts across New Zealand, with COVID-19 effectively ending international tourism overnight, and the uncertainty around international travel is ongoing. This will provide substantial ramifications not only for the tourism industry, but also the hospitality industry that work hand in hand to provide a positive experience for consumers. Many people in the tourism and hospitality industries will likely lose their jobs, and impacts felt indirectly to a number of other businesses. This has been evident nationally and regionally in recent weeks, even with the extension of government's wage subsidies. The impact of the reduction in capacity of these types of operations will be vast. As a result, it is recommended that the uncertainty attached to this assumption should be elevated from moderate to high or very high. Other assumptions that may potentially be impacted include demographics, which includes population growth predictions and economic growth trends. Both of these assumptions may be impacted in the short term, but it's extremely difficult to predict for how long. The big factor will be how quickly New Zealand's economy rebounds from the alert level lockdown period, and subsequently how significant the impact on employment is, particularly at a local level. The uncertainty is the major challenge, and it's recommended that the uncertainty levels of these assumptions be monitored and upgraded at a level if necessary over the coming months as we now enter alert level 1. For the other assumptions, there are certainly links to many of the impacts of COVID-19, whether they are environmental, economic, social, or cultural. The literature to date points to these generally being short-term in nature. I think the biggest takeaway in developing this report, and probably shared across the other authors as well with theirs, is that the level of uncertainty and how this would play out due to the truly global nature of this pandemic. This was reflected in the literature and how quickly it has and continues to evolve as the COVID-19 picture develops globally. Until we have some certainty around international travel and the real impact on employment at a local level, I think we need to maintain a watching brief. I'm happy to take any feedback on the report or any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Certainly an element of the unknown out there, isn't
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't disagree with the assumptions, but I don't think we go far enough. I think that the domino effect of the tourism industry, the decrease in that, the role effect to other businesses, communities is going to be significant. And I think that's an area some of the small businesses that are not directly related to tourism will also have a very negative impact on their businesses. That in turn will have an impact on people's ability to have employment. So it's far-reaching. It isn't just the tourist industry is going to take a significant hit within New Zealand and also in the southern district. There are certain areas that are going to be more affected than others. But the implications are quite significant throughout the whole district. So I think the assumptions might need to be broadened a little bit and just look at the watching brief should expand, I think, would have preferred it to try and get a handle on what those effects are. And the other thing I would say is that I know that Great South are also working in this field as well, looking at the effects that's been happening in Southland as a region, and that we should be in comparison for those figures of the work that they're doing as well. So we don't just work in isolation. Give an example within the fielding area. I mean, we're looking at a $75 million decrease in our revenue, and we're looking at a decrease in employment by at least 300 people. But it's also the smaller businesses as well that are going to take up a pretty big hit. So my advice is broaden your scope a bit more.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to query on page 130 the comment about farming. Does that come from the government climate change response amendment act, or is that a view? And I'm talking about the comment that about transition towards low emission technologies industries and may.
Sorry, that's it. We're reaching on attachment C. Questions.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Sorry, Madam Chair.
I wasn't sure where one ended and one started. Sorry.
Councillor Douglas.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, just in relation to our relationship with Great South, they are sort of the economic arm, if you like, that we have entrusted to do work for us. So are we having close liaison with Great South to ensure that the left arm knows what the right arm is doing?
Madam Chair, very much so. Graham Budd and I are in contact 2 to 3 times a week. They're providing the reports through to us that they are getting commissioned, like the infometrics reports. They've been in Tiana last night.
Yes,
as part of a community-led initiative, but had our staff members there as well. And I've just sent through their purchase of service agreement for them to sign today for the upcoming year, which, as per your recommendation as a council on the 22nd of April, I think it was, meeting, it clearly stipulated that they have responsibility for the 20th of April. That we are requiring Great South to have responsibility for the economic and tourism related recovery messages, and that council is responsible for the community recovery messages, hence Mrs. Tagg's report about the community recovery task force, which is coming up. So the relationship with Great South is very clear in terms of what their responsibilities are back to this council to inform this council. And I can guarantee you that we won't be doing work that Great South has been tasked to do. We don't have resources to do it. Our resource is Great South. The other matter that I would add to is that from Mr. Dominic's perspective, from a long-term plan perspective, we are required to deal with, as per the Act, deal with assumptions. These were the assumptions that he has reviewed that you signed off on as part of the long-term plan process. One of the assumptions that was specific, and I think it was around tourism, and that's hence why it's incorporated in here. Sorry, Councillor, that'll be a long answer, but very much in cahoots and constant liaison and linkage to Great South in the areas that are their responsibilities for this council.
And following, can we expect a report from them to us at council?
Well, the report will come via staff, but a report on what?
On their activity.
On their activities.
Quarterly, as per the contract, the purchase of service contract agreement, they will report quarterly to this committee.
Yep.
And the report is specific to the contract for service that has been sent over this morning. Yep. As well as that, they report as per the Local Government Act requirement for council-controlled organisations that they have to provide a 6-monthly report and an annual report to this council within a month of the financial year. So we're actually asking them for a quarterly report for our particular contract for service, but then they have obligations as per the Local Government Act to provide 6 months and an annual report back. And then we have, Local Government Act got amended last year under the radar, but we then have a responsibility to publish any CCO's annual report for a period of 6 years on our website. So there's statutory obligations, I suppose, is probably the best way to put it in terms of our relationship.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that clarification. I think I, like others, were concerned to ensure that the reports were complementary, and I think in the age of what's happening, that the reports from yourself and others are linked into the information, because maybe waiting quarterly might be too long if we're making decisions at the moment. So we just need to take aware. We understand the mechanism for reporting, but maybe that just needs to be changed a little to ensure we're getting the most up-to-date information and the two reports are woven together.
And I suppose further to that, Madam Chair, one of the things that we as a council, you as a council, confirmed in that April meeting was more of a desire, like while the Regional Development Agency is regional, there are certain things from a district perspective that are of specific interest to you, just as the city has some specific interest, which they have a separate contract for purchase of service contract with Great South to focus on some of their CBD work, as an example. Now, we won't get reported, or that'll be in the 6 monthly, 12 monthly overarching, but we have our own specific purchase of service arrangements, which will be of more of a district nature. And so, as an example, one of the things that one of the areas that you signed off on in April with the Great South contract for service and purchase of service agreement was around support for small, medium enterprise businesses, but with a district, in the district. And hence why I know Mr. Budd from Great South and Mrs. Brown have been visiting visiting parts of the district to again get the flavours of what's happening at that district level, and have been on Stewart Island, been linking in with the Stewart Island community as well. So that connection is quite specific around district communities, not just the regional stuff, which we're trying to create some sort of lines of demarcation, I suppose, which Councillor Menzies picked up on, to assist you in your decision making and assist you in understanding what's happening across the communities of the district as well as the region as a whole.
Just to reinforce some of the comments that Mr. Capers mentioned about Great South, I did invite the CEO of Great South to a meeting last night that I had in Tauranga. It was an open forum and public forum, and 75 people turned up, and it was a real cross-section of business and people living within that area. Very good reception from Great South as well, and had very good participation in that process, so they're very much on board. Absolutely.
Yeah, just following on from that Great South, I'd certainly see some value in a workshop environment where they could come in and sort of report to us on everything that has been going on around, because, yeah, I know we're not operating silos, but I certainly think with the work that they have been doing and the environment that we've got and the knowledge that's out there, it would be, certainly in my opinion, quite valuable to have a workshop environment where we can discuss.
So to answer that question, I know that the Great South are going to come and present to the shareholders within the next 4 or 5 weeks, I think. So that's the opportunity to do that.
Is that combined with all 4?
That's with the 4 as well as the Class B shareholders.
Just that's only really around development agency in Queenstown. I think there'll perhaps be some question marks now about how effective that agency up there has been in diversifying that particular economy. I think the mayor up there has suggested that their GDP is going to, his guess is, fall about 40%. Thousands out of work, and yet that community has been paying millions and millions of dollars to that agency to try and diversify some of that economy. So I'm just throwing some caution out there. It's a bit difficult to measure how we get $1 million worth of resource or how the community benefits from it, but I just wanted to throw that out there.
So we've got
There's some big questions over there.
we've got a workshop coming up in July. We'll be able to discuss some of those points.
Yeah, so we will be able to see the clarity around there about that. To my mind, it's actually a very broad look at regional development or economic development. It's so much more of it is about small business, local business, more efficient and effective. And so I don't think we're in the same place that was
Oh, just a comment really about social wellbeing aspect of our recovery and the place that the arts has in that, and the fact that now with the Ange Neil role not being at Great South, that there's a gap there that isn't covered under the regional development aspect of it, and we need to be aware that that's a gap and need some resources in whatever form it is.
Any comments about mental health too?
Excellent. Good stuff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just welcome Mrs. Rout, and we have Mrs. Adams by Zoom in from Wanaka. This is our district Robinson.
Six.
Okay, good afternoon, Chair and councillors. As you'll be aware, this environmental scan is structured under the 4 wellbeings. For each wellbeing, there's information on what the district may be like in the future. The scan outlines what changes to expect in the internal and external operating environment of the Southland District Council. The scan has been developed through a COVID-19 lens. For each wellbeing, staff have also presented ideas on what council could do in response to some of the respective treaties. Some of the topics discussed in the scan could fit under more than one wellbeing, as there is a lot of overlap and interconnectedness, but I have placed each topic where I think it fits best. This piece of work was completed to facilitate discussions within council. It is also to assist in informing parts of the long-term plan and to help council act strategically. A number of resources have been used to produce the scan. In many ways, the scan is a literature review. Staff have read and analysed hundreds of articles that have been produced since the COVID pandemic began. To produce the scan, staff have also used data and statistical information, economic updates, and information from key external stakeholders. Staff are aware that new information and data has been produced since this work was completed, such as the May budget, so there is an awareness that this document is already becoming out of date. I thought I'd briefly discuss a couple of interesting points from the wellbeing scan. In the social section under health, I've included information on how the COVID pandemic might play out. 3 possible scenarios have been discussed for COVID-19. The first scenario is that a vaccine or effective antivirals are produced. As is outlined in the wellbeing scan, no vaccine for any coronavirus has ever been produced. It is likely to be a challenge to quickly produce a highly effective COVID-19 vaccine. This is because of the genetic instability of the virus and because coronaviruses don't typically trigger long-lasting immunity. The fastest the vaccine's ever been produced is 4 years, and that was for the mumps. It may be possible that a few different COVID-19 vaccines are produced that aren't 100% effective. They may only be effective for a short period of time, or they may reduce the severity of symptoms. Generating the required quantity of vaccines and administering them quickly is likely to be a challenge. The second scenario for COVID-19 is that a population immunity will be built up. Recent evidence has been produced that people who have had a severe COVID infection generate immunity, but that immunity begins to decline. People who have had minor symptoms haven't developed the required antibodies to be immune to a subsequent infection. For population immunity to be effective, about 2/3 of the population will need to have immunity. In this scenario, waves of infections might occur, and it is unclear if the virus will appear seasonally. The third scenario for COVID-19 is that there will be no immunity or subsequent infections are worse. This is, of course, the worst case scenario, but with New Zealand having hopefully eradicated the virus at this time, New Zealand will be relatively well placed if COVID-19 does play out this way. I read quite a fitting quote on how the COVID-19 virus might play out, so I thought I'd share it with you. The CEO of Pan Defence Advisory stated that outside of there being a highly effective COVID-19 vaccine, it is likely the virus will ping pong back and forth in time and geography. The cultural section of the Wellbeing Scan acknowledges the vital role migrant workers have played in the district's tight labour market in recent years, and identifies that due to travel restrictions, changes to immigration laws and fears about COVID, there are likely to be less migrants in the district over the short term. However, the lifestyle on offer and the respect held for migrant workers suggests that migrant inflows to the district will bounce back. In the economic section of the scan, it states how the tourism sector will suffer a punishing double blow from the COVID pandemic. Domestic and global measures to stop COVID essentially stopped revenue, and now New Zealand is entering into a recession. Some businesses in the district will not survive the downturn. The sector may be reimagined and rebuilt through this crisis and emerge as a very different industry. This could include changes such as addressing climate change issues, tourist optimisation, destination management, and a focus on regeneration. The domestic market will be the initial focus, and package deals may be a new trend. Early travellers are likely to be youth, adventure travellers, people on motorhome or caravan holidays, but it is not clear when or if the tourism industry will fully recover. In relation to the environmental part of the scan, none of the topics discussed are new. What is new is that as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, there is now an opportunity to respond differently to the challenges. Of the different issues discussed, climate change has the most potential to affect the general well-being of the district over the medium to long term. Public health restrictions to prevent the spread of COVID have resulted in a sharp drop in carbon emissions internationally, but scientists say it is still less than what's needed every year this decade to avoid climate change impacts. There is a risk that the current economic climate will mean sustainability measures reduce. The counter-argument is that fighting climate change and promoting biodiversity will build a stronger economy in the long term, and the pandemic has presented a one-time opportunity. As you're aware, the Wellbeing Scan also has ideas on what council could do in response to predicted trends. Rather than relay some of these, as the scan has been developed to facilitate discussion, I thought it would be appropriate to now get feedback from the committee on the scan and also on how council could respond to the anticipated trends. Carrie via Zoom and myself are both happy to answer questions you might have on the scan.
Again, it's sort of the moving face though, isn't it, as we move into different, that we're, particularly there's COVID-free here in New Zealand, what does that mean? And does how our viewers hold up and resist trespass?
Excellent point. Very good. I think part of the end result will be based on commercial activities, and it'll be driven by how commercial enterprise is going to react to the future and how it's going to position itself, how it's going to re-engage within New Zealand and international markets. So don't disagree with anything that you've said, but I think that the commercial industry is certainly the part of the way as to what the future of some of those businesses will be. We need to be there, we need to be part of it, part of that discussion, part of that forum, as is with our other partners like Great South. But I certainly see that it will be dependent on our commercial business going to be in the future.
How the commerce impacts on well-being is that these elements that go in here. So, yeah, where our priorities are, I suppose, and how we determine what our priorities will be.
It's also being able to, through you, Madam Chair, it's also being able to have a very clear understanding of what the commercial sector is doing worldwide, but also within New Zealand. Because that would also provide the platform as to what we need to be doing as well. We need to be aware of what's happening out there.
Awesome.
I think that's where I'm sort of coming from. That sort of direction will
be
those sort of business decisions that will be made that will impact on business within our communities, our employment, our housing, our well-being. That's all part of that.
Madam Chair,
to me, it's going to come down to confidence, and confidence will lift enormously if we get an effective vaccine. But reading other reports and so on, the possibility or the probability of getting an effective vaccine within the next 6 months is extremely low. It could take years, and it may not ever happen. But if it did happen, that would be a huge confidence booster.
I agree with you that the vaccine will take
Yes.
years, so we have to figure out a way without it, really, because otherwise it would be
Carry on in parallel.
That's nothing to do.
Oh, yes, just what I started off about before in the wrong place. Just to do with that statement on page 130 about the transition and about increased transition away from agricultural activities, particularly dairy farming. And I just question that philosophy in view of the fact that Southland probably produces food at a lower carbon footprint per unit than possibly anywhere else in the world. And I wondered what would be the sense in us transitioning away from something for it to happen somewhere else where it's actually far less environmentally friendly. And in view of the fact that here our economy is about 85% from farming, why we should be actually repeating that sort of thinking when it's so factually debatable.
Are you okay to address this issue? Can you hear me?
Sure, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. I mean, it's a great point, and I think it's important to bring back to the purpose of this paper that it's intended to spark discussion at a really high level based on a review of literature. And so this is precisely a great forum to bring out those opinions of councillors and bandy around, you know, where council sits on the opportunities and challenges before us. I'm not going to challenge the perspective because that's a valid viewpoint. We're trying to present a number of issues out there that will need to be addressed. I mean, the only finishing point I'd put on that is that through central government legislation, the district is going to have to look at lowering its carbon emissions, and this is something it's going to have to confront in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that can be done through scientific methods along the way without transitioning away from their most economic form of income.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a comment really that through the report it's talking about taking a supportive role, providing a supportive role, supporting stakeholders. But we don't really understand what that means in relation to a council role. And at some stage I'll be interested in a further discussion about that. What is our core service? How are we developing that partnership role with other agencies in the community who have primary responsibility around that support? Because we have got a resource which we've got to spread through a number of areas. So do we spread it across a number of areas and end up not doing anything well? Or we do focus on what our strength is and what our core business is and what our ratepayers expect of us, while where else we can put that support to in order to provide the greatest value to rebuilding the community, and a community which will have different needs in different areas. So I think there's quite a lot of work ahead, which you probably know already. And at some stage we'll need to come back to us on that.
Yes, Madam Chair, probably a question for Kerry. The greenhouse gas emission, is that taken over the whole area of Southwood or just the farming area? We have a huge area south of national parks, trees and goodness knows what, and our greenhouse gas emission overall in reality should be very low. So where do we stand there?
Through you, Your Worship, I might need you to repeat the question. I think what I understood was that you were asking what Southland's specific greenhouse gas emissions are, or was it, have I got that right?
What they are, and doesn't include the Department of Conservation estate.
It does not. Well, does it? Yes. What?
Yeah, so through you, Madam Chair, I don't have a figure for Southland specifically. Measuring that is quite complex. I think that the important part at this stage is in recognizing that New Zealand's contributions to greenhouse gases comes around 50% from agriculture. And we are aware that the district relies heavily on agriculture. And so, as the report articulates, the central government legislation is going to be challenging when it trickles down to our primary economic drivers.
So through you, Madam Chair, just I think there's a couple of points that are pertinent to continue. As Councillor said, this is a continuing discussion. And it will be a continuing discussion for you as a council as we work through the next 12 months in the long-term plan process. And it won't be just related to COVID. So the conversations, and I listened to some colleagues from further north in a Zoom meeting while we were in lockdown actually, and what some of those chief executives and executive leadership members of other councils were saying was the biggest challenge for their councils was recognising that what was now being identified because of COVID actually was there pre-COVID. And let's not use COVID as the excuse. So that's one of the things. And I think the other thing that is really important is, while we have called this a wellbeing scan, we've called it a wellbeing scan because one of the significant areas of focus that, again, you as a council have identified through your strategic framework development over the past 12 to 18 months is that from a community outcomes perspective, the wellbeings are important. And through your through the presentations through the start of this triennium, especially from the Chief Executive, where he linked the wellbeings at a local government level to the Treasury Living Standards Framework, to the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And that actually this is a bit of a global phenomena that is sitting now at a local government level under a wellbeings type approach. But again, COVID has heightened some of the discussions with respect to that theme. And that's something that I think will continue to come across your table as you work through this for our LTP 2021-2031. And some of the work that I know our corporate performance team are doing, led by Jason and Michelle, and through our comms team, led through Louise, is how we show that alignment to see that this district is represented across those wellbeings. Because previously, I've read a lot of what have been called environmental scans in the past from a lot of other councils, going back the last decade, which have informed the councils in developing their assumptions, which have informed the councils then developing their long-term plans. And we haven't done that scan work until now. We used the COVID event as a bit of a catalyst to get us to do that work. That's what our team have produced. And I think it's a really high quality piece of work to start you as the decision makers off on that path of prioritisation and the conversations you're having about what are our priorities, what is our core business, where do we fit in the relationships with other agencies, what is our role in supporting versus facilitating versus coordinating versus delivering versus doing, are all those questions that, whether we had COVID or not, we're going to have to ask, because we have some prioritisation conversations to have, and we have some, where we have prioritisation conversations, we then have allocation of resource conversations to have. And so I think all of this work, hopefully, under the heading of COVID at the moment, but will transition quite easily into, just what we do, and to assist you as the decision makers in making those calls going forward. So, and that's the sort of conversations that I'm hearing from across New Zealand in the local government sector, of everyone is having to have those conversations, and things that might have been not pushed to the back, but might just have been, or it doesn't really affect us, so we won't need to worry about it, have actually bubbled to the surface and are now becoming part of a bigger conversation, which COVID started, but when we move on from COVID, we will still be having those conversations. And I think that's crucial to the next 12 months, as we as a council, as you as a council, and we as a council of employees of council, start to navigate through what all that means as a long-term plan through 2031 will look like.
Questions? Robin, and thank you, Sherry. Anton? The recommendations are on page 52. Between seeds of reports. Draft forecast assumptions endorsed.
So through Madam Chair, maybe seek clarification around Councillor Kramer's specific request around the tourism forecasting assumption for extension, and whether that is something the committee would like to start to pursue.
Do you want me to speak to it? Yep. Yeah, sure. I just couldn't quite see, and maybe I failed to see it, couldn't quite see the significant domino effect to other businesses not so connected to the tourism. I realise that was signed off in our previous council. However, now that we've gone through this process, we can see the domino effect how it's being affected. in the wider community, not just within the tourism sector. As I said, all I was saying that if we take a wider lens of what's happening within our communities and our district wide, we may also get a better picture of what's been happening and what is happening and what the support is for. So
through Madam Chair, we're just looking at recommendation D, and we're asking, this committee is going to recommend to council the amended draft significant forecasting assumptions be endorsed basically, but be endorsed with reference to wider implications on the tourism assumption. You just added that into the.
Yep, exactly.
And then when that comes up to council, that will cover that off. Looking at Mr. Donnelly.
Just get a better picture of what's happening.
So we can just add that to that recommendation.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Is someone willing to remove that recommendation?
Happy to do so with the amendment.
You're removing it?
Yes.
All those in favour, please say aye.
Thank you. Good stuff. Thanks, Michelle.
Right, I do believe that we're going to
Normally
So
bring it
how
up.
many is it, Alice?
That's in the 48.
How do you feel? You all right?
It's all not down nowadays.
Go live.
We can't do it.
Right, we are live now, and so welcome back to the team. Page 175.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, councillors. So the purpose of this report is to seek your endorsement for the establishment of a Southland District COVID-19 Community Recovery Task Force and the associated terms of reference. During alert level 4 and our subsequent move down through the levels, the community leadership team has watched with interest what has been happening in terms of recovery around the world, throughout New Zealand and in Southland in particular. These examples, including the establishment of several task forces, are detailed in paragraphs 8 through 44 of the report. Today, we're asking you to endorse the establishment of a Southland District COVID-19 Recovery Task Force, whose purpose will be to understand the effects of COVID-19 at a local community level, with a focus on the 4 community wellbeing areas, being economic, social, cultural and environmental. The task force will consider information about the impacts of COVID-19 as they're being felt and experienced in the Southland District communities, including any issues, support requirements or locally developed solutions. A strong focus will be on understanding and developing opportunities and solutions for service that are traditionally delivered at a local community, it's non-profit, level by community organisations, clubs and societies. The establishment of our own COVID-19 Community Recovery Task Force is just one part of Council's approach to recovery in light of COVID-19. As we were talking about earlier, and if you recall from that April meeting, Council agreed to revise the allocation of investment with regards to the Great South Statement of Intent for 2020 to 2021, which meant a reallocation of some of the SDC resource to the Regional Development Agency to provide a greater level of support to the business support services function. As you'll note from this report, we've asked Great South specifically to establish, in conjunction with iwi, ICC, our council, Core District Council, Chamber of Commerce and other agencies, a small medium enterprise business recovery task force. And we've also asked them, and align with other agencies again, such as iwi, City Council, Core District Council, Destinations Northland, ILT, etc., a Southland Tourism Sector Recovery Task Force as well. We see that our own Community Recovery Task Force will, in addition to the information provided through our community boards, assist in expanding the link between council and its communities by providing information about the issues at a local community level and how they impact on the services delivered by local community organisations, clubs and societies, as well as regional agencies. As you're aware, this council has adopted a twofold approach to community governance. We have our representative leadership pillar, which involves council, committees and community boards, and provides elected members with the representative leadership opportunity. And we also have the pillar of community governance that involves the community-led development approach. It's proposed that the development of this task force will really support the community-led development approach, and we think it will be a great opportunity to feed into council that grassroots community voice, which in this case will have a specific focus on the impacts of COVID-19 at the local community level across our district. If you refer to the attached terms of reference to the report, under the purpose, you'll see that this task force will also have the opportunity to feed into council ideas and suggestions for aiding and assisting recovery in our communities by directly reporting to this committee as and when required. And the task force may also wish to enter submissions to our long-term plan process, or in the shorter term may suggest the development of projects or initiatives that will aid local communities in their recovery efforts and ensure that the not-for-profit sector is supporting the future requirements of their community. You'll also note under the terms of reference, under the task force membership section, that we are also seeking approval from this committee to delegate to the Mayor, Deputy Mayor and the Chair of this committee the responsibility to determine the membership of up to 10 people in the committee. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you about this, and I'm happy to answer any more questions you might have.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just interested about where, given we've set up a representative structure with the community boards, about the opportunity to use the community board in a similar way to what's been proposed by the task force. And we're setting up something alongside. I'm just...
Yeah, so we certainly took that on board when we were doing that, but we saw that this was a really great way to have that whole community-led approach and to have a different group of people to what is currently on our community boards. Also recognising, I guess, that our boards have been particularly busy over the last few months, and we expect that to continue as well. They're meeting monthly at the moment as well, so just conscious of not putting more pressure on them, but also saw that it was just really important to have a group outside of our structure that's not influenced by council and council decisions that can feed back into us. We're not looking for it to be an onerous task for these people, hopefully just to meet perhaps monthly or 2 monthly by Zoom just to get that feedback. So we're not looking for it to be a big job, and again only a 12-month project as well.
And so I have one other question around that with regard to Ngāi Tahu representation on...
But what we're looking for is the real local community people that are on it. So we would be looking for people, well, I don't want to put words into my subcommittee's mouth here, but looking for people in the community that wear a number of hats, so that we definitely have ties to Ngāi Tahu and to local iwi, but we'll also be able to have a whole lot of strings to the bow in terms of community groups that they represent or are aware of.
Thank you, and I would just encourage perhaps getting some feedback from community boards about where they see this, because they may have an opinion around how busy they are or their input into this. Thank you.
Questions, discussion?
Well, it seems that we're talking about using similar people, like from around this table and this organisation, but a different structure. I'm still, so I'm just not completely done with slope. But why? What is the reason for establishing this task force? That we can't do it with the structures that we have in
We
place.
really want to have that community-led voice as well. Like so often, people that are with their boards, they're hearing us. We just thought it would be really great to have some fresh blood perhaps, or some new voices around the table. And we have talked about how we wanted to have more of a community-led approach, and saw that this was a really great opportunity to bring some new voices to the table.
So these voices that you're bringing to the table, who's deciding on which voice?
And so as it says in the report, we've suggested that the Mayor, the Deputy Mayor and the Chair of this committee have a hand in determining who the makeup of the task force.
So I'm still not clear on why we're establishing this task force.
So that we can have that voice from the community, so we can understand what the issues are. If we look at the makeup of our boards, you know, I would say there are probably some gaps already in the people that make up our boards. So we're looking to have a wider range of people. Also, while we're maintaining that good geographic spread, like appreciating that we do need to have the geographic coverage, but also just that real different voice in some not-for-profit groups represented in there, as Councillor Menzies said, like making sure we've got iwi in there, which we've recognised that we need to have more consultation in that space. So it's just to really bring all the voices to the table for people that are impacted.
Everyone's impacted by it, aren't they?
Madam Chair, this is an opportunity to open the door of council to another group of people that represent a community voice that is outside of the council structure. One of the things that as a staff we hear regularly is, how do we have a voice with council and councillors? And as we've seen as a response in other areas of New Zealand and Australia and across the globe, these types of task forces have been set up with a finite purpose to do a particular role and then disband. I suppose from a council perspective, the question is, why would you not?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think just following on from Councillor Menzies, we've got to be a little bit careful that we're not undermining the community boards and their role, because I think the makeup of the community board in essence is made up of those people that you're kind of talking about, with the representing the different sort of groups. And I think if we go about it sort of saying that we want to go community led, but you've got the community board over here and you're going over here, you're undermining that whole representation process. So I don't disagree with the idea of a finite task force, but I think we need to integrate it a lot more into the community board and bring the community led through the actual structure that we've got, so we're not sort of sidelining our own setup, if that makes sense.
I would see that the establishment of this is actually, it is specifically for the community recovery task force. So it's actually about hearing in one group from different areas of the district that are included, so that we make sure we get that whole story, and that yes, the community boards certainly have a huge amount of information about their areas and their experiences too, because a lot of them are actually involved in broader organisations as well. But it's just adding to that. It's time, I think it would be a really interesting discussion group to be in. And I would see it as just to be, hearing from people and getting them to discuss how they're seeing the world in this particular point in time. The impact of COVID at this point in time.
But what would you get out of that you're not getting out of your current community board membership?
Because it's a different view, different people. It's just adding to the conversation.
Isn't that the role of the councillor, is to canvass the community and get the feedback from the community, particularly in difficult times?
That's not to say that we wouldn't be able to connect with ourselves as well. Still looking for just another in the code.
So you through the chair. So a committee of 10, 3 elected members, well, 3 so far. What is the makeup of the other 7? Are we talking elected people? Are we talking business people? Are we talking?
Through you, Madam Chair, the intent is not for the Mayor, the Deputy Mayor and the Chair of this committee to be on this task force.
They're there
to appoint
the 10.
And the test, as Mrs. Taggs pointed out, the task force's responsibility is to deal with those, the not-for-profit sector of our communities and the issues related to, across the board, those from a wellbeing perspective, the impacts that are affecting at the township, village type level, and the particular clubs and societies associated with it. So it's not a business focus, it's not a tourism focus, because as we pointed out, that's where the task forces that have been asked, Great South have been asked to develop, will take the lead in those particular sectors. This is about your district communities across a variety of different topics of interest in the third sector of community, which is the not-for-profit sector. So it's not private sector, it's not public sector, it's the not-for-profit sector area that is, as we've seen from some of the examples in other regions.
Yeah, that's
different. So if I understand you correctly, I may not have picked this up the right way. So it's about linkages in with the NGO sector, the non-government sector? That's your not-for-profit?
Regional as well.
Who meet on a regular basis as well. So regional, are you talking about ministries or? No, it's just the not-for-profit sector.
At the local club and society level, the gun club, the arts and like what Councillor Duffy talked about before with regards to don't forget arts as a means of recovery. So what's happening in our district that is putting out what do these people identify as a means of something that needs to be considered as part of our recovery approach going forward for those communities. It may be, and again, correct me here, goes wrong, but it may be that some of this task force work also informs the Community Trust South as an example.
who are funders of the sector. And you have regular meetings through the funding forum where again, this type of conversation has come up to where they've encouraged to be party to and to have assistance with getting this information feedback through to them. That's how part of those regional forums work, as I understand it.
That's correct. And I think one other thing we saw as we were in the lockdown period was that our team had regular meetings with emergency management Southland as well. So we were just constantly talking about what was happening in our communities, and we just found it a really valuable tool to have that real on the ground. Like, yes, we had our boards and we still talk to them as well. We had regular catch-ups with them as well. And it was just another layer of information that was coming through from perhaps some different sectors that aren't necessarily represented around the table. It might have been, like you say, some of the sports clubs, or it might have been the community workers in our local towns understanding the issues that they were having. And those people, in some cases, are on our boards, and in other cases, they aren't. So it's just trying to get that wider view of what those real issues are.
Yes, Madam Chair. I'm sort of following up on Councillor Scott's comments there. Going to appoint another 10 people around the area, and they are encroaching on community board areas. I'm quite sure the community board chairs in most areas would sort of want to know why you've appointed somebody over the top of one person out of their committee. I think you're on some dangerous ground here, because we were just told 18 months ago that we didn't need CDAs, and now I know we've had COVID-19 or whatever it is, will be to blame for this again. But here we are setting up another committee of 10, and I'm quite sure of the structure that we've got, the numbers we've got, should be able to cover
it.
It's not a committee, it'll be a task force. It won't be a proper governance. But yeah, I'm pleased that we're having this discussion, because what I would have been recommending is we go to the community boards and seek their decisions. And I haven't discussed this with Mr. Capel or anybody in regards to this, but I think that's where I would go first to stop that criticism and keep the localism going. But I've heard that that's a good idea and that's not a good idea. We need some direction on this. I know Mayor David in Taupo has really progressed his task force up there as a business type plan, but that's with the businessmen and in full recovery. We have got Great South doing the business stuff. We have got Emergency Management Southland doing a lot of the recovery. And we're going to have a task force to go out and look after our communities. Personally, I think it needs to be community-led. And I'm picking up on what Mrs. Tagg says, that there are variances in some of the representation we have on some of our community boards, but they have a fair representation. Like, we've got some from Southland District Health Board, some who know about primary industries, farming, just thinking off the top of my head, some of the others, builders, policemen. Surely we can use that resource as well. I don't know if there should be a stipulation that we can't, but I'm happy to lead on that one. And this is a regional, it's not town specific or area specific, it's across our district.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've just been sitting here listening because I was completely, didn't have an opinion. But I'm just starting to visualise now that these people, I see them perhaps coming from, say, Rural Women or Plunket and, say, Lions and the fire brigades or whatever, and they're just a sounding board for what they're experiencing in their perhaps with truancy or whatever, at the level that they're dealing with. And it might not be the same exposure that the community boards are getting to some of these issues that we learn sometimes are going on right under our noses and we don't know. So given that it doesn't take a lot of resource and it can be turned up or down or off depending on the value as it shows to be as it goes along, I think it might be worth a try. I mean, to me, the issues we've got over in Waihopai are vastly different to the issues that are up in Te now. So regionally, we're quite different in different places. But I think, I mean, as I said earlier, the impacts of the COVID-19 in the view that I see haven't really materialised yet out our way. And they may in the next 3 to 6 months. But perhaps I'm not seeing the picture where it really is behind some closed doors. So it might be worth. I mean, I often say that you regret what you don't do. You don't often regret what you do. You've got the right motivation for doing it. So.
Yeah, I was just thinking about where the point of differences between community boards and this, and obviously community boards have very specific geographic areas, and that seems to be the main difference with this, is that, but to have a group of 10 people and expect them to give you a view of all of Southland would be a bit of a stretch, I think, to find people who are that well connected, but also have the time to come along to something else with more meetings that doesn't have very specific outcomes other than just informing council. I think it would be a hard sell to get them involved, to be honest. But yeah, I'm still a bit confused as to what the main outcome would be of that group, and just, yeah, a lot of caution over how that's communicated with community boards, because it could, I'm sure they all have views on a lot of stuff happening in their communities that they don't necessarily get to raise through the community board meetings, that if they had another forum to raise them, would probably raise them. So.
Yeah, well, just a couple of things. I'm just a wee bit confused. Gary, me and Tom wrap it off potential membership. And I didn't hear non-profit there. But Rex was saying it's a non-profit focused task force.
So
is it focused on the non-profit area?
So your community board should know what non-profit organisations are in their patch or thereabouts. Otherwise, we go and see Jackie at CTS, Community Trust Southland, or it's on the list anyway. But there are groups, your bowling clubs, your golf clubs. Yeah, you know,
so it's specifically focused on the getting feedback from non-profit.
It's getting feedback from our community on those that are struggling with, because they aren't being supported by other means through small business or whatever.
It just seems that we're adding another layer of complexity in our effort to communicate with our community.
But do we want layers of our community to miss out? No. So it's an opportunity that either works or doesn't, and like somebody said, you either try it or don't try it.
Maybe we'd be better off focusing our attention on the existing structures and building them, working on those for small council, big community.
And I believe that's what this would be, because it is all their existing community groups that are out there. And we're just trying to tap into their knowledge without overloading the existing group that we would need as community board. So just touching base with people around that would actually be some information about current situations. It's not like it would be planned for 12 months as a task force. It might not even last that long, depending on how what feedback we get. What people don't want to be involved, they don't have time to do it. They nice that answer.
It's a good indicator, isn't it? I think if you're going down that community approach and people aren't interested, then that's a good answer, I guess, as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think if we're making an assumption, if they're saying that the community board is going to be overloaded by it, I think we almost need to go to them first and say, what do you guys think about this? And integrating this into your current role. Because when we're talking about, and we talked about it earlier on in the year, about the people that aren't in the room, and that's coming up again today. But if we're going to integrate those people into the room, I think we need to do it through the community board rather than trying to bring them into the room and this whole other structure separate to. And yeah, I really strongly think we need to go through the community boards first with a COVID task force role of some sort, like you're talking about here, but coming.
From the point of view of being charged with establishing this, I would think that I would be going to the community boards to ask them.
But do we need to actually have a separate task force, or can we add that to the role? Because what Councillor Duffy said, that what's happening in Fiordland is very different to what's happening in.
There's but for council to have the overview and get those voices that aren't there. Is this the way to do it?
But you could do that with your, look, if you run a community workshop inside your thing with a focus of COVID, for the community board to actually advertise for people to come into the room and present on their things of COVID inside, and then they can get feedback through council from a report that way from each specific community, because you're going to get those differences that way rather than 10 people trying to cover the whole of Southland with all those different sort of facets going on.
Yeah, I was going to actually just suggest that kind of idea, that a community board fosters a workshop, a discussion, gets those people in their community board, and that will help us to actually get the community boards talking to community groups as well, which is something that we set out wanting to do. And if the community boards kind of like are almost fronting that, and that could mean there's 10 people in a Reti, 10 people in Te Anau, just coming together, saying what's happening where it's at, we might get even a greater voice. And the effect of that going forward is community boards have then engaged with those community groups in a time of crisis, which hopefully they'll continue to do long term. That could be another way of getting the same information, but through the community boards.
Yes, Madam Chair, this is actually a pretty complex issue. We have in some areas groups and businesses that have been operating well, and we have other groups of businesses that have not been operating well, and they're going to say or claim that it's been the fault of COVID. So I think it's very, very important that we have good representation if we do go ahead with this task force from the various areas and good representation.
Perhaps each community board could establish a member task force.
Yeah, I'd just like to support the comments around the idea of the community boards having a local workshop where they bring in other local people, and people are much more likely to get involved in something that's a couple of hours in an evening and give their input for these busy people than commit to a year-long project of meetings that they're not sure what the outcomes or outputs of that are going to be. And I think you're more likely to get an idea through that process. You're going to get different segments of different geographical communities, and it's going to give you a stronger overview of this is a region-wide issue on this particular topic, or this is a local specific issue, which is going to affect your solutions and outcomes as well.
Just joining back to you, Karen, I believe that our non-profit organisations have got some really challenging times ahead, and being on that ground floor trying to get that fundraising dollar is phenomenal. And we're going to see it south-wide, aren't we? So we are going to get the same stories back from each community board. I can see where Kelly's coming from too, to get other voices, to be on that ground level, to the right people approaching the right organisations as well. You know, if we put other people around that table, there's also the thought that we're going to get other ideas, other strings and bows of organisations that maybe we haven't even thought of. So I can see it both ways. I know we can't, community boards are so important, and we do need to be, they need to be so much part of that representation of it, but you know, the more we can, Thank you, Madam Chair. I think what has been suggested around the community boards engaging in their own community and bringing in 10 people has the opportunity to long-term provide a structure for getting comments on many different things. And when I think about 10 people who are representing all these non-profits, when we can count the number of not-for-profits is far greater than 10, how do you decide between one not-for-profit body and another not-for-profit body? And often the managers or leaders of those not-for-profits are based in Invercargill, so they're not living in the community that their organisation represents. So I think the opportunities long-term to look at it happening through the community board structure, the opportunity that might be ahead, for example, when we're consulting on other elements of the long-term plan, it will strengthen that kind of feedback too if it's picked up on. But essentially, the important thing for me is that we take the community boards with us on whatever the outcome is, rather than setting up something else alongside them without them having a voice.
So to go to the recommendations, then we have D that we're, and sorry to jump in here, but there is, it sounds like there's an appetite to establish it. There's possibility that we're going to look at endorsing the terms of reference. So the only thing then is the delegation to the Mayor, Deputy Mayor and Chair to then come back to you with to determine the membership of the group. What I'm hearing as part of this group that goes ahead, this task force, to pick this task force is that you'd prefer it to go through the community boards.
I was going to make the comment that perhaps it's a two-stage, that there's a real strength in doing something at the community board level, and that may actually, by the time we've done eight community boards, isn't it? Nine. Oops. It was 10 for a while. By the time you've done those meetings, you may actually find your 10 people, because the people who come and speak and input into those, you may actually find someone that suddenly like, that's the person we need, because they've represented who they are, and we've got this collective body across the region. So it's kind of started community board, community level, and then out of that, we go, oh, actually, we've found some really good key voices who have added to that conversation. Let's get them together regionally to form a task force. And that would kind of mean it's grassroots level coming up through community board. They've been part of that local discussion, which gives local information, and then that goes into then a regional, which forms this.
So I'd just like to, if Councillor Kramer might like to comment on his meeting last night, where there was a task force of 3, I think, set up this evening, and ended up with 75 people coming along. It's community confidence as well. You know, you were shocked and amazed with how you tell the story.
Well, I mean, I put something on the Channel information page and also on the Channel community page, or Field community page, indicating that I was like to put a form together to consider ideas for the future of the economic tourism, concerning the impact of COVID-19. I had about 40 people that registered their interest that they would like to come along. So I thought, well, maybe I'll get 30. And there were 75 people turned up. And we had, in my view, an exceptionally good meeting. Some fantastic ideas came through. It was very positive. It didn't solely just focus on field, and I was interested also that they focused wider field as well. That's the impact it does have through the rest of Southland as well. And it was purely, I let them die. I didn't have a lot of people to make any speeches. I spoke probably for about 4 or 5 minutes at the start. There was no other speeches, and left it to them, and they come up with all the ideas, and just did a summary at the end. But it was certainly community focused. I just facilitated it. I've got a bit of homework to do out of it, quite a bit. but that's all part of it. But it worked exceptionally well.
That's because people want to speak about this. They need to get stuff off their chest.
Yes. But I mean, I do have to emphasise that it's probably just slightly different. Councillor, he also made the point that it's different in Te Anau compared to what's happening in Edinburgh. And also, it's also because it's so centralised and looking at one particular area of the community. It could be more difficult and more spread out communities to get those sort of people together. I'm sure it can happen. Because it was such an impact in that area, there was a lot of concern about trying to work out how can we assist in getting our economic growth back in Fielden. And it may be different in other parts of South. So each area will be a little bit different. But I can certainly hear what's being said around the table. We do have to be mindful. We did go through a representation review. We have entrusted our community boards, and they have got a greater role. I can see this working alongside and with help, assist. It's not take over. That'd be the worst thing, would be the last thing. I can certainly see that maybe provide some information to them. There'll be a lot of good community boards, I'm sure, they would say, hey, look, we'll do it. It's how you link all that information back and kind of send it to the community is doing their own thing. And we then set up a mechanism that it comes back into a centre point so that we as a council have a total overview of the impact and implications on the district as a whole, and not just in the odd topic that somebody, the community board and 2 years doing their bit, and somebody else isn't doing theirs because they say it's not a high priority. They say, well, it's not really an issue yet. So you're not really getting the full picture of what's happening in the state of district.
Would it be an option for the other councillors or all councillors to do something similar to what Councillor Cramer has done at Te Anau? Councillor Cramer is pretty experienced. Not far to come to it after give us a handout. So I'd be quite happy to do something like that to it after, and I think it's a very good idea. If each of the councillors done it, we could probably get something done reasonably quickly. If you go through the community board, it might just take a wee while.
Well, sure. But it wasn't a community board initiative. It was a council.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
But fully supported, full communication, discussion with the important community board. So before also I did some research with a number of people within our community, and then spoke with the community board chair and sort of developed it from there.
That could be all set up probably within a fortnight.
It took me within 2 weeks. 2 weeks.
Is that different to a fortnight?
I was giving you the opportunity.
Just, I'm sort of thinking about this and what Councillor Fraser said with doing those sort of workshops first, and like I'd almost suggest taking a step back and going, right, well, let's not shelve the task force, but run those workshops first, and we'll get an idea of where the community is actually sitting, and with the community leadership team there and their knowledge, and they're linking it all together across all the different communities, we'll be able to source and potentially, like Councillor Fraser said, get the right people out of it, but there might not actually be a need to do the task force. We might just have to do another few meetings down the line with council or whatever works or action points are made from those meetings. But I think, really do think the starting point needs to be, before we even decide on how we're going to structure a task force, we start at the community board workshop level and bring those other people into the room and get that kind of feeling. And like Councillor Cramer managed to achieve 75 people last night, we could get the same across the community and get a wider reach through the community board structure.
Just to add to that, if I may, Madam Chair, I advise it's a three-phase approach. One is that you get ideas meetings, second is you analyse those, and the third one is you get the right people around the table to implement some of those ideas. So if one of those ideas relates to something that involves the Department of Conservation, is getting the right people around the table saying, right, this is an idea that this community came up with. How do we make this happen? What is it that we need to do? And then it's a number of other organisations that I will be in contact with. So, we've said in the past, we've got to get the right people in the room to be able to make the right decisions and actually get some traction.
And that's where your
So that's why it's a
specifics,
two-phase approach.
yeah, and your specifics for your community are going to come in, because what's going to work for you with the right people in your area is going to be very different to other parts of Southland.
You'll probably find some very similar work, some, yeah.
Just a word of caution is that your meeting wasn't specifically for not-for-profits, and my understanding is that the purpose of this is for not-for-profits, so that's the key difference. So the response might be very different.
Yes, so just a question for you, Councillor Kramer. So what was the outcome of the meeting? I mean, it's all very well to have meetings and so on. Did you get some action points out of it that are going to be followed up and reported?
As I indicated before, it's a three-phase approach. One is the getting the ideas, which was the objective last night. The next one is to analyse those objectives or those ideas. Each group was tasked with coming up with 5 priority ideas. One group had 30 ideas, but they picked 5. And then I'll pull all them together. And then the next phase is I'll go back to the community board. And I'll discuss those with us to see how that impacts onto the community board's strategic plan, because they may have a link in there as well. And then the next phase is that third phase is that those priorities, we then all get the right people around the room. So how do we make it happen? So you've got your priorities, then you get the right people and say, all right, how do we make it happen? That's the action plan. May not all happen overnight, but there'll be some areas that I think we could, some of the ideas that were brought up last night, they are achievable in a reasonable time frame. And it's just a matter of somebody facilitating that to make it happen. And that's the role that I'm looking at doing. But you need somebody to lead that.
Yep, certainly.
Okay. And Councillor Kramer, do you actually anticipate picking, say we go ahead with this task force, picking somebody out of that group that you had there the other night?
Oh, no idea. No predetermined.
Okay. Because like the community board thing can be quite different, because you can have 6 at the community board and no one that is actually suitable for the task force. If you know they don't own the right thing in it, right affairs.
I had not thought about whether it's a community board member or one of the 75 that was at the meeting. Hadn't given that a thought, because of getting on the discussion that was happening here today. So that's, sense. Yeah, as I said, I link the community board in from the start, and I will be linking the community board in again. It's part of the process.
From my point of view, the way I would view this would be that they would not be community board members necessarily, but community board members would be there to listen.
Yeah.
Because that would be, we have those ideas. Around the table, like they are inputting already, the people that you would be talking to here would be those that were outside that involved in those patterns were local government, but might be the arts or advocacy somewhere else. So that you sort of just like a sounding board really, and I really don't see that. I think that the community boards would certainly need to be aware and be involved, but I don't think they need to be threatened by this. I see that this is just complementary to finding more information, and they would welcome it. And maybe it is picked by community board area or geographical area, maybe we would to a certain degree, thinking about some boards, but that you would be asking people for. So, any further discussion?
I just wonder if we're proceeding basically on what the recommendation says, if it might be some value, and instead of having max 10 individuals, have 10 organisations that appoint individuals, and it may not be the same person at each discussion.
How do you choose a team?
Geez, how do you do that, eh?
How do you choose a team?
Well, just the same as you would choose the 10 and anything else, you just randomly, well, not randomly, but the sort of thing, but community organisations that deal with different facets of the community.
Then the question would be, does.
Whatever we do is a blank piece of paper, it is, we'll all know after it's over what we did right or wrong, or could have done better.
Does it, is to remove the recommendation for, does it need to be limited to 10? Does it need to be the establishment of the task force be a discussion item that goes forward with the input that we've received here about communicating with the community boards and seeing how they feel about it and what they might see permissible from the information?
I feel like establishing a task force is one step too quick. Like we haven't done any of the broader, what are the issues? Like typically when you establish a task force, you would know, they would be given, here are your goals and outcomes, but we just know broadly you should provide some feedback on how the COVID-19 is affecting not-for-profits in your area. Like it just seems like.
Or not.
And it's not. There almost needs to be some more work done first before establishing a task force. And I think the community boards are one opportunity to gather that information, whether they go out and have a broader community workshop where they invite people to talk to them and then feedback.
And I have no issue with that approach, it's just the length of time it takes, like to have boards meet 2 monthly, half of them are hearing each this month already, or they're in the next few days. So it's just, I guess it's just a time frame. It's up to you about how important you see this as being and how quickly you must progress. We can absolutely go and talk to the boards, put this report out, talk to them about options, but we probably won't be coming back to you till maybe August.
I'm not suggesting for a board meeting. I'm saying they've got the flexibility to do what Able did and put something out there and saying we would like to invite anyone from the public who's involved with not-for-profits to come and talk to us about how things are impacting them now, so that we can feed them back to council. And
so I suppose one of the things that we looked at was how we did well areas. So as an example, Fremantle for the COVID recovery, the Community Recovery Task Force will hold workshops for service providers, 40 clubs and other community groups to understand the extent of impacts being faced by different groups in the community and what support they may be needing, and then bring that task force, brings that back to council. What you're saying is you want the community boards to do that. Is that what I'm hearing? That's what I'm hearing. But if that's what you resolve to do, we'll do that. What we were saying was based on what other people have done and fine tuning the process to, because that, as Kelly has said, is while you don't have to meet, you still have to arrange all of that. Then are you saying that get 9 of those get collated back to be brought back to here to then decide whether you form a task force? That's what you're saying. That's right.
Yeah.
And again, happy to do that, that's you want, but I guess it depends how agile you want to be in this space.
It doesn't sound very
From a
we've been talking
point of
about
view,
agility.
yeah. And from a practical point of view, absolutely happy we will do that for you, but it will take a good couple of months to sort
Well,
out.
that's 6 months.
Yeah, and we've had feedback when we've done other community workshops, we need at least a month's notice for the very first one.
I'm sorry, but I actually disagree. We have the ability to communicate with our community boards very, very quickly. We have the ability to have a Zoom meeting. You can jack up the Zoom meeting with your board very, very quickly. It shouldn't take 6 months. If you want to have a chat with your community boards, you can do that very quickly.
Oh, I understand that, it's the organising the community meeting by then, that's the bit that takes the notice and.
No, what I also is that you could discuss this in a Zoom meeting to see whether there's an appetite for the community boards to pick this up. So that's where we're basically at. If we're going to go down this path, that community boards undertake this role, and we then collate the information out here, and the CPLs can organise Zoom meetings with the community boards and the council. You can do that reasonably quickly. And to see whether there's an appetite for that or not. And if there is, then you move on. Then you actually say, righto, your community boards are going to be doing that work. And then, how quickly you can move that along.
So Kevin, suppose you she asked Council, well, asked the table, what happens if 5 of the 9 say they're into it and the other 4 say they're not interested? That's their call, is what they're telling us, and we don't worry about those other 4.
It's their call. It's a community board's decision, isn't it?
Well, that was the point we were saying from a district perspective, is it?
We're not getting the whole picture.
Because from a district perspective, it comes back to one district or one community, like his district count. That's, I suppose, the nub of decentralised approaches.
Centralised approach.
Sorry?
To a centralised approach.
Well, and also community-led versus within a structure of council. That's the nub of the, that's why I'll be sitting listening and understanding the views, that some of you are very reliant on sticking with the representative leadership approach, which is via your community boards. Others of you are, let's say, a bit more open to allowing the community, and I think Councillor Keshi's word, not threatened by, allowing the community to have a voice to bring to the table by way of an outside of structure, small council, big community approach for that. And that's the dilemmas I'm hearing in the conversations, of sticking with your community board structure and just operate with that versus opening it up for a community wider perspective.
It will be harder to collate a district-wide analysis based on individual groups doing their own thing. If you have a group that coordinates that or works with, they collect that information from all the different areas, pulls the bits of string together, and you have that overview. So I suppose that's the actual difference.
I wonder if it's both ends. So we set up the task force and then we go to the community boards and say, would you like to do a local thing? And then it's both ends. We get local and we get the district. And if a community board says no, well, then we still get the district.
So 3 minutes here, I was just looking at recommendation F. Delegates to the mayor, deputy mayor, and chair of community strategy committee, and to work alongside the community board chairs, or the community board and the chairs, to support with determining the membership of up to, or if you don't want to have a maximum, support, determine the membership of a number of individuals to form the Southern District COVID-19 Community Recovery Task Force. So it's confirming the linkage to the community boards by way of who we delegate to support the appointment of a task force. That's if you want a task force. That's the other point, though. You're still going to go back.
On that basis, I'm sorry.
I think that might provide a way through this impasse, and I don't want to be sitting here discussing it for another hour. But that would also provide a further opportunity to discuss whether this is the way to go about it, or that in the future we work through the community board structure. I think it's being respectful of the community board structure. It's offering them an option to come in, but it's also responding to your need as well. But I'd also like to endorse the agility that we may have in the future through the current structure. It's very easy to put an email around to community boards. We don't have to wait for a meeting. Let us be agile with the way we communicate with our community and community boards and others, because we've got used to working with technology, most of us, over the last wee while, if we weren't familiar before. But let's change the way we're working. We don't need to do it the way we always have done. Let us be more agile and be responsive to our community at the same time.
So if you went ahead with that recommendation, who would actually recommend suitable people in various areas, or or they just be up the mayor, deputy mayor, or chair of the community capacity at their discretion.
Liaison with the community board representatives. And then the mayor, deputy mayor, and the chair of this committee would make the appointments which would come back as per G, I'm reading it right, to report detailing the membership of that. And it's that point where you can say, actually, that we think that that person's not right, or why is that person there, et cetera, et cetera.
We could go back to non-profit and organisations. Do they have to be members of non-profit organisations?
So members of the community.
It's not the total focus. No.
I would suggest rather than discussing this now, there may be merit in having a discussion about the criteria that may be useful for membership. And that way it's balanced and more objective.
Right. So pleased we've had this discussion. I've been quite right at the start. But no, good to see, and I think this is the fair way. I thank you for bringing this report because it's obviously been of concern. You've heard it out in the community. I don't think it should, but we should put the pressure back on you to sort this. I think the mayor, the deputy mayor, and the chair should be the ones that go to these community board people and start the process, because this is a governance role. So if that F stays where it is, I think that's where the delegation is, Mr. Capel, that I don't think it's fair on, you've brought the concern to governance, and I think it's up to us to respond. So I'm happy to move that resolution, recommendation.
Is that with the amendment that was
The amendment.
earlier by?
So through you, Madam Chair, so the amendment is F delegates to the mayor, deputy mayor and chair of community and strategy committee to work with community boards to establish the community board representatives.
Community boards.
Members. To establish the responsibility and determine the membership of up to of a number. Did we change it?
I think we don't have a number. In case there's 2 from each community board, you end up with 18 or something.
Of a number of individuals, Southern District COVID-19 community recovery task force. Are you happy with that?
I'm happy with that. Just to move it.
I'll second that.
So with that in mind, Councillor Byron, did you have anything to add to the comments?
I just wanted to check. It was all voluntary task force, wasn't it? There's no cost to the.
Right.
So we have recommendation A to Jane. With the amendment, we've read out.
I thought it was councillor.
Sorry.
Discussion.
So all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried.
Yeah, that was famous last week.
Page 100. Kieran for community. Sorry, Kieran.
Hi. This is just got a simple recommendation to save it.
No pressure.
Okay. So the purpose of this report is just to advise you of the Caring for Communities work stream, which is essentially came out of NEMA. It all relates to COVID-19, and it's really a continuation of the welfare stream of work that, in our case, emergency management Southland has been doing on our behalf and doing a great job, I would call it, during this pandemic. Our team also, as I said earlier, did catch up with them regularly, twice weekly, and just the amount of knowledge that they had about our local communities was pretty amazing. So this is just really about what happens next. So we've come, we're at alert level 1 now, we're out of response and into recovery, and so this is just talking about what's happening at a national level. So there has been a governance group formed, for caring for communities, and I did hear today that they're about to sort of do a bit of a tour of the country as well, just finding out what the needs are in that welfare space. I think there's also been some talk too around who the lead agency is going to be, and that hasn't yet been determined. And there, I think there has been some discussion about even being a new agency. At a local level, the welfare needs are, from a financial point of view, have been transferred to the Ministry of Social Development, and they are working with the regional commissioner on that, just in terms of the job seeker benefit and things like that. And also at a Southland level, emergency management Southland is still providing support to the foreign nationals, just until we're a bit further through and there's some more clarity around who's going to be looking after that. So really just the purpose is just to give you the background to explain what this title is if you're hearing it bandied about in your community, so that you've got an understanding. It talks about in the report the network of networks, which is something that the National Task Force put together. When Emergency Management Southland went to look at the local Southland network of networks, they decided to do things a little bit differently. Firstly, recognising that Southland's unique to a lot of other regions, and that we don't have a lot of government department heads based in Southland. They tend to be Christchurch or Dunedin based, and also recognising that they had a lot of existing networks already in place. So they're sort of hoping to work with those as well. So that was things I talked about the different colours that they had. Sorry. So it had the different streams, so all under the social recovery banner, which is the Māori Leaders Network, the Community Response Network, the Food Security Network, the Foreign National Support Network, Improved Health Outcomes Network, and the Welfare Coordination Group Network. So that's all going to be a group of organisations and groups and NGOs and government departments that will all come together into different work streams within Southland to be a part of the recovery. And as I said, our team has been involved as part of the community response network throughout the response phase of the pandemic. So that work is going to be ongoing, and once we have more word about who the local leaders will be able to come back to you with another update of that. We'll just email that out. Maybe to answer any questions.
Questions. So when I read the network of networks, I just thought, really? That sounds a bit like resources.
And it's quite complicated to do the national one as well. And that was another thing I think that I recognised was that because Southland is quite different, that we need to probably have something that's more fitting with their names.
It's my research. So that's great. Any questions of the
Easy question, right? With EMS currently undertaking their role, when does it actually stop? Like, we've gone to level 1 and the state of emergency, I think, is over now. So when do they actually stop carrying out their role?
Well, I think to a point, someone in the room maybe didn't believe in answering this, but to a point they've ceased a lot of that now. Like, I think we've finally got to stop having the hour number at least 7 days a week and things like that. And as I said, they're still doing the welfare stuff in terms of the foreign nationals, but they're just trying now to transition over to ESD and to the other agencies where they can. So yeah, it's sort of happening at the moment.
questions? Someone reads the recommendation that's on page 189. Members, voting for, all those in favour, please say aye.
Great.
Against? Carried. Okay. Welcome communities, options moving forward, page 191.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good night, because the sun's about to go down.
So the last time I was in front of you was at the 11th of February Community Strategy meeting, and we talked about the transition of welcoming communities from Great South to each of the councils. So as a result of that, it was requested that we put together a paper around the issues and the options and the resourcing requirements. So this is what this report is about. I'll take it as read. However, I do want to draw your attention to paragraph 15. So it states here, whilst there has been no official statement from government regarding the future of migrants working in New Zealand, that has obviously changed since when this was written, and I believe a couple of hours ago, Immigration Minister Ian Lees-Galloway spoke to media to state that Cabinet is now in the process of reviewing working migrant visas, so that perhaps is something you want to think about in light of this decision. But yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions as you make this decision.
Yeah, probably from my point of view, I would think the welcoming communities isn't just migrants, it's all newcomers, as you sort of hammered out a few times. So, but yeah, they do part of the complexity of it all, but Councillor Fraser.
Thank you. I guess the question for me would be the outworking and the implementation of the strategy, and how do we get, there's some incredibly useful tools that have been developed. We use some at work, and I've used it in my training. It's just an absolutely brilliant resource that's been produced. And so what's the outworking of getting that into our community to get work in community groups and perhaps schools and just the wider community? How do we make that happen? Otherwise, it's a document that spend a lot of time and energy on. It's good that produces nothing. So.
Yeah, well, being part of the Welcoming Communities program, there are a lot of resources available to us to grab from Immigration New Zealand and MB. So it's up to us internally as to distributing them and getting that out. So that would fall back on the community leadership team and anyone else who is particularly passionate out in our community boards or communities that are really keen to fly that flag and help us with the distribution of that.
So does that 10,000 incorporates an allowance for material and?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
That's time to.
Not so the $10,000 isn't necessarily to be used for staff time, but for disbursements around materials and things like that. So yeah.
Resources.
Yeah, resources.
So will you move in there?
I'm more than happy to move that. Yeah. Just looking at the sun going down.
Can I have someone willing to second that? That's what means. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Carried. Very much. Point 10, Madam Chair. Go to page 235. Wellbeing and strategic issues overview.
So through you, Chair, this is just a standard report that comes at the end of each of these meetings. It's a shortened version this time with some of the highlights on each of the wellbeing areas and looking at from a regional view some of the domestic campaigns that are occurring as a result of the push for domestic tourism across the country. I was taken as read and it's just open for if there's any discussion which you as a committee wish to make.
Points for discussion on.
Well, if there's no points for discussion, can I ask something then, please, of the committee? This is about the fourth one of these that I've prepared. They take a bit of time. They're prepared to generate discussion. They don't generate discussion. Do I stop?
I think that's a very pertinent question. They have been asked for by this committee.
Or are they okay for reference to refer back to as just reading, but you're okay that, like, I mean, I'm happy either way, it's just.
Collation of information on it, that's what
Well, just one thing, Rex, that digitisation is positive. I think we had a guest today that suggested that screen time is not a positive for our community. Too much screen time.
So what was that? What was that?
Around the screen time for children or anyone, adults, too much screen time. And yet we're rolling out this digital economy, and so, and we're encouraged to assume it's all good, but in actual fact, it's not. There's a lot of negatives around. And then of course, the next part down here is something about nature. It's like, oh, well, that might be the answer. Get more involved in nature, but I'm just wondering where we're getting where the full well-beings are coming into our school services, what work's been done on that. Say, for example, the roads. How do we incorporate the four well-beings into this huge road infrastructure? There's nothing done on that.
Oh, I just think that the four well-beings are such a focal part of what we do now that to get a report on them is an important thing to do, even if it's just to keep them focused in front of us. And we might get better at asking questions about them as time goes on. We probably ask better questions at 2 o'clock than we might have asked you on this year.
Thank you. I'm conscious of the time that this report takes, but I agree it's useful to have those references there, and it's also useful for you just to highlight to us specific references that we might be interested in reading and why, because it may relate to our situation. Maybe you might be the best judge of that, whether it needs to be as lengthy, but it's hard when you're putting it under the four well-beings. But I don't always go in and read them, but I know I can go back and take that opportunity.
I wonder if there's also a challenge for us, and maybe particularly issue at Don, because I know he thinks differently at times on things, that some of those concepts that you're thinking, you could feed back to Rex to include in this. And if we're seeing things that we think are good, we can feed that back so that we're getting to think about those.
Thank you, Councillor Fraser. I'm up for it.
I think as well, just like you said about creating discussion, like there's a whole lot in here that hasn't been discussed at all today, and that's domestic tourism. Like we've all been talking about international visitors not being here, but and Southland, if you don't count the Auckland, actually has quite a strong domestic tourism base as a start. So we're probably actually got our front foot forward and actually being able to leverage off that to recover, and like that information you've got in there, I think is quite valuable as well. But,
Thank you. I mean, that was pretty much all. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't, if you like, not being seen as worthy. It was primarily, I suppose, just getting reconfirmation or affirmation that it is still. It's good. Thank you.
And yes, the challenges to put for well-beings and we don't. It's a good way to start. And, to keep thinking about it rather than just making decisions on particular infrastructure, etc.
Context of a rise from your slumber could be it.
Not quite sure on page 3. I recognise the signature, but not sure if people know. Page 3.
Some of them have got better since then. Weight loss.
Sure.
Tracy,
There
Oh.
was something like to move that we received this report, yes?
I'll move on.
Thank you. Councillor Owen, Deputy Councillor Harper, all those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Now the workshop.
Couple of very quick points for the workshop.
We are still finishing the meeting